everybody. Welcome back to the Safety Doc podcast after only a 10-month hiatus. So, yes, some major renovations down here in the North Star recording studio, including a new floor. And we finally addressed that termite issue. So, things are back on track. And I've been receiving a lot of questions lately about school mask mandates, K-12 school. Now, suddenly, we've seen a flurry of litigation in this area in the last couple of days. So I'm going to unpack this process of what exactly is the deal with Board of Education policies and practices for deciding if you have a mask, if you don't have a mask, who's liable, what about the money that schools received, right, from the federal pandemic relief fund and some of the wacky things that school districts bought with this pandemic money has nothing to do with cleaning and sanitizing and stuff like that, more about sports. So we're going to get into that, and I'm going to talk about contact tracing, what that looks like in schools. Also, environmental services. So this is a big part of the discussion, which has been quiet, right? Like, it's very common for schools to be tested for mold and MRSA and things like that, and to have companies come in and do remediation. Sometimes they have to shut a school down for a couple of weeks. They're getting mold out of ceiling tiles or, behind a false wall or something like that. But so, like, where are these services? Like, why aren't we hearing about this on the news and coming in and testing surfaces or testing the air? So I'm going to get into that. And then also, again, pick apart some of these recently filed lawsuits as of like today against schools regarding masking, and then also lawsuits where a parent has claimed my child became ill at school with COVID-19, and it was because the school did not implement appropriate mitigation measures. So this is going to be crazy for schools. A little bit here. I am teaching 2 school legal issues courses this fall. So this is right in my wheelhouse right now, plus being a school administrator for 20 years. Right, Mick Tabis? Is Mick Tabis in the house? It's Chad Elkins. Oh my God. It's Chad Elkins. Chicago, the Oracle of Chicago, Chad Elkins. John Steele, Bacon, Sast, Andrew. Wow. Joe Dolio. Holy smokes. Joe Dolio is in the house. Wow. This is Gore Monger is in the house too. So thank you for being in the house, everybody. And so let's get into it. Mask guidance in schools. So what is ideally supposed to happen in a school setting is that there would be guidance delivered from the county. Okay, so pandemic guidance, especially last year, when things started to kick off in districts, and districts were like, I don't know if we should be going in person, or if we should be going virtual or have some blend or all of this stuff. It's the counties, I suppose if you're Louisiana, it's the parishes, right? But that are supposed to give guidance to the districts on that. And the counties tried to do that for a while, and they got behind, or else there was pushback from a district, or they would say, yeah, we contact traced and there was a sporting event here, so you have to call everybody, and then there'd be people would be angry about that. And so a lot of people, these organizations, right, these county level health organizations just resigned or said, we're not going to do it anymore. And then it defaults over to the school saying, school, you make the call. So where I'm at, we have 471 school districts, including Washington Island, which is on an island. You have to take a ferry to get to that district. It's like 58 kids. And basically saying, hey, you make the call on whether you have a mask or not. So the state hasn't done anything with that. And then the federal government doesn't do those mandates for schools, just like school safety, right? So the federal government doesn't mandate that all schools have locked doors. That would be a state-by-state decision, and actually only one state does that. So it's left to the districts to make their determination on this. So welcome over here to Chad Elkins, celebrity moderator. Oh my goodness, yeah. I've got to figure out the moderator thing and give a few more moderator blue wrenches out here. But I see we have Sast and Bacon. Keep things in a good place for us tonight. So again, this is coming to districts, and a lot of these districts and their board of education, board of education when you're voted on is an entry level position. So they don't know much typically coming into that about how schools operate, and especially how schools operate during a pandemic. So schools are making these kind of toggling these decisions of should we have mask or shouldn't we have mask. Now the problem with that is, how are you informing yourself? So when I talk to school administrators, I said, wherever you fall on this, you have to be able to prove that you debated it, right? That you took information, you're either in contact with medical providers, or if you are using CDC guidance, or you know, whatever it is, that you have some process where you're making these decisions. And that's where things kind of fall apart with schools. So when I talk to wide number of administrators, about half will say, our school board just kind of voted. They just said we're going to be all, you know, optional mask or mask requirement. And there wasn't much that came into that. And that's part of it, right? So Board of Education will make a vote, and then it's the superintendent who has to make the decision of how will we implement this. So if it's a mask mandate, let's say that the Board of Education says everybody has to wear a mask, then it's the superintendent's job to figure out, okay, how are we going to notify people? How are we going to message that? Are we going to, email parents? What if parents don't speak English? How are we going to communicate that out? Are we going to have signage? What's the expectation for administrators? What if somebody doesn't have a mask? Are we buying masks to provide? What if a kid doesn't wear a mask? Or what if they don't want to wear a mask? How does all of this happen? How about professional development? Teaching kids to wear their mask, especially a 4-year-old, right? Who's going to take that mask off or take it off at recess or whatever it is. So you have to have all of these things that go in with that. And you have to document that. You have to have that ready to go. It's called discovery. As some of my friends are finding out right now in districts that have received lawsuits. And, the attorneys are asking, well, show us how you made people aware of, whether if you're masking, how you are making those determinations and any exemptions to that. So yeah, it's really wonky right now. And these lawsuits are coming up where parents are suing districts, and they're saying my child became ill because they were exposed to a child or a staff member who wasn't properly masked, or masked without fidelity, right? That the mask wasn't on all the time. So like, how in the world do you do that? Like, that's just crazy. So let me go over here in the chat. So yeah, welcome, Sass, welcome, Chad, welcome, John Steele. So all right, mask in the real school world. Here's another question. What actually constitutes a mask? So, does a bandana that a kid is wearing at school, does that constitute a mask? In some places it does. I mean, how do you say, is it surgical grade? Well, who knows, right? Like, unless, is it N95, which would have the marking on it. So the other part of this is what constitutes a mask. So a board of education really should put this in a policy, or have some statement on what is acceptable as a mask. And I wrote about this in my book, The Velocity of Information, which is right here. So yes, this is actually, this will be out in February. This is just my print copy here, 255 pages. But so imagine if you were to enter a school, and the school was to provide you, the child or the parent, with a mask, and so they knew that it was, whatever, N95. And then as you left the school, like, you dispose of the mask and stuff like that. There are no procedures like that in schools, right? Anything is a mask. And you can go on Etsy, and there's over 1 million masks available to buy. And you can also type in like mask plus rhinestones, and you'll find masks that have rhinestones and other things like affixed to them, or riveted to them. So I guess the question would be, what's the validity of any type of mask, as far as preventing exhaled aerosols, or preventing aerosols from coming into your body? So at what point is this really a compliance thing? What part of this is compliance theater? I mean, because you're not checking any of these masks with kids, so you have no idea if they're really reducing aerosol or not, right? So it's pretty crazy. It's just pretty crazy. Um, so how, and again, how are you enforcing this? So this is the question that's coming out right now in litigation, is saying how to school administrators. So tell us about your process to make sure that people and kids were wearing masks. Were you going around periodically and checking? Was there an expectation if a kid didn't want to wear a mask, then what happened? Were they sent home? Did they need some exemption from a doctor? So these are the type of things that sound sensical right now, like they make sense. But in the moment, like a lot of this stuff never got done. So it all becomes this hindsight where schools are trying to remember, like, what did we do? Or did we remind people and stuff like that? Um, so you can, some students can receive medical exemptions, right? So particularly students with disabilities, that they don't have to wear a mask. In those cases, then those doctors orders. So if the child isn't wearing a mask, is everybody else in the room wearing a mask? Or what if you have multiple children who are exempted not wearing a mask? Then are you making sure that they are socially distanced? And how do you do that for the entire day? And um, so those types of questions get asked, and you have to have an answer for that. So contact tracing. I don't know about you, but I remember it was last year this time on my phone. There was an app, download it in the middle of the night or something, and it was the contact tracing app. And at that point, I think you had to download a companion app to make it work. But if you had been in proximity of somebody like 15 feet away for 10 minutes or something, and they tested positive for COVID, it would notify you, and you were supposed to self quarantine or something. But schools are left to contact trace on their own. Now, there's this thing called deterministic assessment, right? Deterministic testing. So if we tested everybody every day who came into a school with a rapid test to see if they were COVID positive or not, let's just say that this is something that you could do. You're testing everybody as they're coming in. You would know that day who was positive and who wasn't. But how this really works, contact tracing, right? Is it has to be someone who gets sick. They go to a hospital and they're tested, and then you are like, whoa, like this person tested positive. So then you contact the school, and the school's trying to look at schedules of, okay, like this student or staff member taught this class and they taught this. So what it ends up being is like, everybody around you, class period is usually 50 minutes or whatever. You're like, oh my God, there are now close contacts. So I get these notifications daily. I have kids in school, and buzzing on the phone, please check your email, your child was in close contact. We do not require them to stay at home, but please monitor for possible COVID signs. Now here's the deal though, right? I live in Wisconsin, so this time of year, possible COVID sign, that's allergies, that's colds, that's flu. I mean, all of that stuff is out there. So like, how do you distinguish this stuff? So again, like, we're not doing deterministic testing on any of this. So it's really just a guess, right, at what the numbers would be at any point in time. So this becomes really a challenge for schools, and schools aren't out front either with temperature. They're not taking every kid's temperature as they come in, and okay, if you have a temperature 100 or more, we're going to do additional rapid testing. That doesn't happen. So some districts contact trace and others don't. They don't even deal with it because they don't have the staff or they don't have the technology in the smaller districts, and they'll just be like, forget it. So this whole thing of thinking this contact tracing. So I saw this on, I don't know, it was New York Times or something, where they had, you probably saw this too. Put it in the comments if you saw this. I'd love to read it, or lead me out to some links there. But it was a teacher who they said took her mask off to read a story, and then like 8 students in her class became infected with COVID. And they knew it was her because apparently they tested these 8 students and knew the specific, the virus that they had matched her virus. I don't know, some DNA type matching or whatever, whatever it was, where they could say it was a specific strain in this classroom. But like, that's a fairy tale, right? Like, that doesn't happen in other districts. That might have happened with the specific high end medical biological assessment team in this one setting where they went in and scrutinized this, but that's not the way that it works. at all. Like it's just a guess. So this thing of contact tracing is it's so loosey goosey, like it's all over the place. Um, so it's crazy. Um, let's talk about let's talk environmental services. So this is the part of the discussion which is being left out of the discussion. People aren't talking about this, and they should. So, when I was a school administrator, I had this a couple times. You'd be notified by environmental services, and those are the people who are testing your buildings for how much lead is in the water, right? And um, uh, if there's any mold, like on surfaces or in your HVAC system, I think they do that to make sure there's like Legionnaire's disease and stuff like that. So, and MRSA, right? That was a big thing. I wrote about it in an article like 10 years ago. MRSA, or the flesh-eating bacteria, was a big scare for schools. And now, don't really hear much about it. But environmental services, that's usually contracted out by schools, these companies, and they come in and basically check that the setting is safe from mold and MRSA and stuff. So I contacted some of these companies and I said, so here's the deal. Like, could you test for COVID in the on a surface, right? Could you do that? And by the way, like it's isn't it weird that we don't have any any very specific guidance on it'll last this long on the plastic surface of this book, or it will last so long on a door handle, or if it's exposed to sun on a playground, or I don't know. But I said, can you come in and test this stuff? Could you actually do this? I said, sure. Like we have the technology, we can do the equipment and all that. We can do that. Okay, so you can do hard surface. Can you do air samples like in a cafeteria or out on a basketball court? During a break during a basketball game, could you do an air sample and determine if there's COVID in the air? And they said, yeah, sure, we could do that. Like, I'm asking them this, like, I'm trying to put some impossibility out there that there's no way they can do. And they're like, yeah, of course we can do that. Are you crazy? Like, yeah, that's easy stuff. Like, come on, like throw us a 95-mile-an-hour curveball or something. Like this is, of course we can do this. So then I asked, I said, are people asking you to do this? And they said, no, absolutely not. And so, I'm not asking why, but I can kind of deduce why they're not being asked to do this. And the reason is if you find out about it, right, what are you going to do to mitigate it? Like, what are your options? And that's a hard question. So I was in a district where they had mold at an elementary school. And by God, the last thing you want to learn before school starts, like literally like a few days before, is we found mold behind a wall and in a ceiling tile, like in 2 rooms. I'm like, oh God, no. So that usually ends up in that building being shut down for a couple weeks, and mold mitigation team comes in. It's the Mike Wazowski type thing. What is it? Put it down below in that code from Monsters Inc. It's a code 48 or something, whatever it is. 4816, whatever. Come on, Bacon, do it. Or SAST. Now I'm going to be trying to figure that out. But so anyway, you have this stuff, right? Like they come in, they mitigate it. You know how you're going to message it out. And MRSA, the same type of thing. This isn't that uncommon. And it's a pain, right, as an administrator, and it disrupts the whole school routine and all of that stuff. But yeah, it's a good idea. But unless you give me your number, I have no one to call. All right, I don't know what's going on there. That's what's asked. But yeah, so with schools, the question is, where should environmental services be? So schools received a ton of money through, and let me get the actual act here. It was the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief, or the ESSER, ESSER fund, in March of 2021, and have received additional dollars since then to improve things like HVAC and stuff like that. So anyway, schools get the dollars, and I for sure expect it, right? Because in school safety, when you get money from the feds or the state, it just gets poured into things like bollards and cameras, and there's no shortage of vendors to just rush to you. So I'm like, why hasn't that happened, first of all, in this case? Because you anticipate, right, that you're going to be sued as a district for that you didn't prevent a student from being exposed to COVID, like they were in close contact, or you didn't clean the handles or the desk or something like that, the door handles, desk. So you anticipate that. So like, where were the vendors? So another part of this is, with the just-in-time manufacturing and the shortage of goods, the vendors just weren't there. Like that's another thing. Yeah, the Monsters Inc. thing, bacon, get on that. Um, but yeah, so the vendors weren't there to provide because they didn't even know what to provide, like for products. And there's a difference in school safety too. I was thinking about this. So if I am selling a school yellow bollards to put in front of their doors so somebody doesn't run a car through the front doors of the school, that's, first of all, it's pretty unlikely that that scenario will ever play out. I can sell those and make a lot of money off of them, and I can just kind of vanish like over time. Like no one's testing the validity of those bollards. They just kind of get yellow and and they get rusty, and they're just like that. People forget about them, right? Like, but if I am selling a school something that is going to like sanitize areas and things like that, there's probably a likelihood I could be named in litigation, right? That I provided this remedy and it didn't prevent the school from having this cross contamination. So that's why I think a lot of these companies are kind of staying on the sidelines too, not rushing forward and saying, "Hey, we've got like these brand new HVAC filtration systems that we can sell you, and these standalone air sanitizers and stuff like that." 2319, yeah, 2319 Jodolio. So I think that's happening. People are standing on the sidelines, and they're not rushing into this because you don't want to be named in litigation. So anyway, this whole environmental services thing is a big missing piece right now. And again, like if a school finds out about this, let's say a school comes in and has somebody test for COVID on door handles and desk and things like that, and they find out 80% of the school is positive for these things, what are they going to do? Like, how are you going to effectively mitigate that and then continue to mitigate that? So I think there's some part of this where schools are like, I don't want to be the first one. I don't want to be the leading edge of that, right? Like I want to see another district go through that and see how it works out for them. So pretty bizarre stuff going on, but I'm really surprised. And here's another thing, like we've seen this on TV, right? Or I've seen it. And let me know down in the comments too if you've seen this, but I've seen school boards bring in doctors to talk about why you should be wearing mask and things like. So doctors are trying to they're trying to basically give the board a reason to vote yes on a mask mandate. So the board will say, come in doctors and present, and I'm like, that's the part of that that's wrong, right? Is like, it's your environmental services, it's your people who can come in and test your sites and kind of tell you what is actually going on or what's in the air, and then like how to mitigate it. Because let's say that you had mask, right? So here's, I'm sure, what every school is afraid of. What if you had mask and kids are wearing mask, and you go in with your environmental services during the day and you're taking samples and you're taking air samples, and it tests the positive, right? It has positive COVID, and you're like, well, we're masked. What do you do then? Like, what's your next step? Is it going with a different type of mask? But then what if that doesn't change things? You know what I'm saying? So there's some thinking down the line here of, with mold and MRSA, it gets, pretty, at least it gets pretty objective, where you can kind of identify these things and try to suss them out. But I remember being in stands at a basketball game and watching the kids with a mask, and the mask is down half the time and they're touching the basketball and stuff. And I'm like, if there genuinely is COVID out there, if one person has it, everybody has it, because everything's being passed around. You're taking, you're breathing deeply as you're playing the sport. It just, like, who's sampling, who's testing this stuff? But no one really wants to go down that road, right? This environmental services, but that's what should be happening at board meetings. Bring in environmental services and have them talk about, yeah, here's how we're going to assess, and here's how we can mitigate. And there's some pretty cool things to mitigate. Like there are these anti-virus laminates, kind of like a paper, right? What counter or cabinet paper? You know what I'm kind of talking about? Sticky on one side, and transparent, translucent. And those are available. Like you can get those. Like that's another thing. I can go to Walmart. I went to Walmart yesterday and there's plenty of Lysol and Microban and stuff like that. Um, why why don't schools take some of the money that they've been given? So I'll talk about that in an example here. But billions of dollars have been given to schools and small districts getting at least millions, and they're not um, they're not hiring like as I would say, a cleaner. So right, if I was a school administrator in a smaller any district, I would say we're going to hire with this money some people to clean, right? And that's your job. You're going to have, as Joe Dolio would say, the Solocator app. So you'll have some kind of mobile device with you in an app. So every time you go and clean an area, you'll have a area that you'll clean that we identified with environmental services, and we know that like these door handles, the cafeteria tables, and whatever are higher contact areas. So you're going to go and sweep, and you're going to clean these. And every time you clean them with your whatever it is, Microban, Lysol, Magic Spray, whatever. You're going to take a picture and document it. So you have a timestamp. You can show, hey, like we have a routine. We go through this. We're addressing our high contact areas and the areas that environmental services have told us to address. But that's not happening. Like that's not happening anywhere. And it's kind of a novel idea, although like it seems super easy. And I guess you can say, well, there aren't people out there to staff this. Well, maybe. I mean, that could be true, but I'm not sure that is true. And especially what I would do is to do it before the parents arrived as they're coming up to the school, just for public relations, right? These schools are all battling what's in this game of open enrollment. So, if I don't like it in this district, I can take my kids to the next district or to the private school or charter school or homeschool. So why as a school wouldn't you want to have it very visible that you were disinfecting door handles and things like that as kids arrive, start a day, and kids exit at the end of the day? Like, why wouldn't you do that? So, it's weird. I'm trying to think this out of this whole position of a cleaner and trying to keep these areas sanitized or so it's weird. So let me tell you about funding. This is where things really get crazy. So schools received funding through this act, again, the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. That was the first round, March of 2021, ESSER, ESSER. And so here's what they did. It's basically a block grant. Now, a block grant is when you can spend it on almost anything you want. There's very little follow-up on it, accountability, and things like that. And I went through a number of grants. I was working in schools back in, I think, 2008 in the Obama administration, the ERA grants, American Recovery, Response Recovery Act. And I mean, you had to document that it was American steel and American labor, and it was pretty intense on what you could use these funds for. But in this case, it's pretty open to interpretation. If you're contributing to a safer school environment relative to COVID, the money wasn't questioned. So here's what happened. Instead of putting in more sinks, instead of more hand washing stations, instead of buying more, just regular things we do for the flu, like, right, hand sanitizer stations and soap. And these things were available. They're still available. Talking with some soup friends, I'm like, is this stuff, you can't get it from vendors? Like, no, we can get it. So that stuff was really the intent, right, of trying to get these laminate films, get these hand sanitizers, renovate a bathroom so you can put in some extra sinks in it, maybe make it wheelchair accessible. Like, that's all the intent of this. Put in some portable filtration systems, maybe if you can update your HVAC system. So a couple things. One is the HVAC system. So there was some guidance that came out from the feds, and they said, MERV 13, MERV 13. So a MERV 8 filter would leave more particulate matter through than a MERV 13. MERV 13 would take out like a virus. So schools started to realize, hey, like, if we were to do this, we'd kill our HVAC motors. Like, we can't circulate this stuff. Like, their motors aren't strong enough to do this. And By the way, the building is 85 years old, and every time, there's a breeze outside, it comes in one side of the building and out the other. So there was just a logistics thing of looking and saying, by the way, we can't get these parts. There's nobody around to install them. And even if we could bid this out and do this, it would take a year or two. So, like, this doesn't make sense. And you only have 3 years to spend the money. So, some of the schools, one near me, bought, get this, they bought field turf for their athletic fields. So instead of grass, artificial turf they put in their on their fields. And they didn't have any the boards didn't feel bad about that, right? They're like, well, we weren't going to get it any other way. And I'm like, this is crazy. But here was the argument. Well, now we have we have a surface that kids can be on more, whether it be FIAD or we're doing classes outside or some stuff like that. And of course, if it was raining and it's a traditional grass field, it would take longer for it to dry out and stuff. And so that passed, muster, because there really is no oversight on any of this, right? If you can make any remote argument that putting in an artificial turf football field at a small high school for $2 million, makes sense versus, putting in some more sinks, versus all of these things. I mean, I would even go down and say like two-way radios, right? Every school needs current two-way radios if you survey them. And you could say, well, then we could use, we could update all of our communications, our two-way radios, stuff like that, and repeaters. And then we can, identify where kids are at and space them apart better. I mean, easy argument, right? Like I could give that argument, take me a minute. And no, it's just coming this money piling in. So that's another question that's going to come up to school boards is, how did you make determinations on how to use this money? Like, did you hire a part-time contact tracer or hire cleaners? Or no, we got a new turf field for our football stadium because there's no other way we would have got it, which is actually what happened in some of these places. And actually there's a waiting list now. There's 5 other schools because they saw the one school get away with it. So they're in line to do the same thing. And right, like this is completely crazy. And that's where people need to realize it. And as Sass said, the EDU needs to burn down to the ground, start from scratches. It's impossible to defend, right, Sass? It is impossible to say that in a school getting all of this money, all these billions of dollars coming out into K-12, and to basically have, again, that block grant, anything goes as long as you can justify it in making a more pandemic responsive environment. Again, something that would take most of us a minute to come up with some way to make any argument for anything that we needed in a school or didn't need. Maybe it's just like this wish of want. And suddenly here you have $2 million and you're putting in this artificial turf field. And that really, so it really gives schools a bad name when they do that. These things get into the media, and especially then the school boards are like, well, too bad. Like, what are you going to do? I mean, we put this in. And that's another thing, right? So schools are going to be very careful to not hire people because they don't want to lay off people. So when the funding is gone, 2-3 years, they're not going to sustain that with local budget. And it's probably not going to be sustained through additional grants and things like that. So it's just things that you can buy instead of people that you can hire. So that's where, again, if you can do things like put in artificial turf, what are they going to do? Come rip it out? I mean, they're not going to do that. So how can you objectively argue that it contributed to your school being a safer environment during a time of the coronavirus? You have no idea, right? I mean, again, you'll just be able to make a speculative statement saying we had this area available so people could take their kids outside for class on a sunny day. By the way, it's getting cold here right now, so I don't know. It's just it's nuts. So let me bring up this article right here, and so this is the school district is Whitewater High School, Wisconsin. It is in my conference here. So we actually beat the Whitewater Whippets in football at the start of the year. in a home game. So yeah, they had to charity up and not play on their artificial turf, because where I'm at here, it is old school, lumpy grass. So it is the way that football was meant to be played. Um, but yeah, that's pretty crazy. So let me just take this. This is an article from the News and Observer. Wow, the News and Observer. It's one thing to be the news, but if you're the News and Observer, yeah, that's pretty damn good. Um, so the News and Observer, Colin Binkley and Ryan J. Foley, I guess from the Associated Press, October 7th, 2021. Um, and right here, one Wisconsin school district built a new football field. In Iowa, a high school weight room is getting a renovation. Another in Kentucky is replacing 2 outdoor tracks. All is funded through the billions of dollars in federal pandemic relief Congress sent to schools this year. So it's just crazy, right? And you'd think at a school board level that a school board would be a better steward of your money. Like there would be a very thoughtful, informed discussion. And you wouldn't be doing stuff like this with money coming out during a pandemic. So what would be things that would logically make sense? Updating your computers, right? And your ability to do distance learning, any of your Wi-Fi stuff, of course, hand washing stations, ventilation, HVAC, windows. I mean, replacing carpets with hard flooring. I mean, it's endless, right? It's not hard to figure out how the hell to appropriately spend this money. So, yeah, fiduciary duty is a real thing. Yeah, Joe's right. And it's extremely frustrating to see things like this, because it makes it very challenging for districts that do try to address these other issues, like sanitizing and hand washing, stuff like that. So let's talk about parent litigation. So this had been quiet for most of the fall, and I thought litigation was going to come from two sides. One is called compensatory education, students with disabilities. So the first area would be that, hey, special education students not receiving services in school. By idea, the Individuals with Disability Education Act, you're required to provide X number of minutes per week per the IEP, individualized education plan. A lot of that just kind of went out the door during the time of remote learning. So I thought, oh, there's going to be litigation here. And I know that area well. Like I was a special education director for 20 years, and I'm like, didn't happen, right? Like there was like virtually no litigation, especially around me. There was nothing with that. So I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And I'm thinking, well, the next area of litigation is likely to be parents litigating against a school saying, hey, my kid tested positive for COVID or had COVID symptoms, complications, or whatever. And I believe that they receive this at school, right? Because they're in the school setting, and whether the school didn't have masks or the masks weren't enforced or they weren't enforced on the bus or whatever, like that would probably be the next area. And it's happening. So where I'm at here in Wisconsin, the last 2 days I've had 2 lawsuits filed with notice that there will be several other similar lawsuits filed in the next few days. So let me bring up this lawsuit here from filed against the Waukesha School District. So I've got the 3 monitors in front of me here. So, all right. This is Tuesday, October 12th from the Associated Press, our good friends over there. Parent sues Waukesha School District over lack of COVID protocols in classroom. So I'll just read a little bit here. A parent has sued a southeastern Wisconsin school district after her son contracted COVID-19 from a classmate. So right there, I'm kind of like, I'm not, how did you identify that it was from a classmate? But it's apparently what the lawsuit says. The Milwaukee Journal Sentinel reports that the student's name, or the parent here, filed the lawsuit in federal court against the Waukesha School District and School Board on October 5th. According to the lawsuit, the board in May removed a student mask requirement and other COVID-19 mitigation measures. Mitigation measures, cleaning, right? High contact areas, testing for COVID, hand washing, signage that for social distancing, maybe having social distance markings up around the school. So if you're lining up in the lunchroom, that things like that. So stuff like that. So in this lawsuit or in this article, it goes on and says one of the son's classmates came to school with symptoms in September this year and didn't wear a mask. Jensen's son. Okay, well, I'm just reading. So Jensen's son was seated next to the sick student and was wearing a mask, but still became infected. So, so anyway, like, so other lawsuits are coming out like this. This is get over it. So other lawsuits in this blueprint, in this specific blueprint, are coming out. And so if you are on so they're naming the school board. So every board of education member, and usually the administrator, and sometimes other administrators. Like if it's at a building, like they might name the high school principal, because the principal, for example, would be charged with carrying out the mitigation, processes in that building. So this is crazy. It's crazy times, because Board of Education, members now are having to deal with something that is called, the assumption here, right, legally would be that this is foreseeable. So one is the student, didn't die from this, right? So, but you're saying basically that, okay, the school should have known better. This is a foreseeable, it's like a day when there's possible sleet and ice coming in, and the school district didn't get people out to salt and sand, and somebody slips and falls. Like, this was going to happen. Like, it was on the news, and there was like alerts coming across. There's going to be like sleeting and stuff today, and you didn't. It's foreseeable. So in tort law, now I'm not an attorney, but from a tort perspective, a civil perspective, this argument could be like, this is foreseeable, right? You have these kids together, you don't have them masked, you have these areas where they're together in close proximity, homerooms, passing in hallway. I mean, pretty much everywhere in a school, right? 400 or 500 kids, schools are built for economy. That you should have anticipated that there would be kids would be coming to school infected, and they would be sharing that then with others, or staff, and they would be sharing it with others. And because you didn't take these COVID mitigation measures, one, masking, all right, this is what the suits again are based upon, masking, and other mitigation measures such as social distancing and sanitizing, kids washing their hands, all of these things that I talked about before that you'd have to document, right? So I talked with one administrator where their district was the recipient of litigation very just recently, right, with this matter. And he said, what are we likely to be requested to provide in discovery? I mean, they're working with their own legal counsel and stuff. And I said, well, obviously, like the things I'm talking about, like what discussions did you have with custodial about sanitizing areas? What professional development did you do for social distancing with staff? How did you educate students on social distancing? Was that, through assembly, right? Yeah, let's do an assembly. Let's get 800 students on bleachers. But was it like was it a video that you put together that was all of these things, like you have to be thinking ahead, because these are things which are going to show that you had reasonable efforts to make people aware. And how did you enforce this, right? Were you as teachers, if they were seeing students with this, were they reminding them? Were they providing masks to them? I mean, what were the ways that you're doing that? And I said, those are the things that you're going to be questioned. And I don't know where any of this will go at a court level, especially if everybody kind of gets litigated against, which is more or less happening in schools. It's just big, there's big boulders coming down on everybody right now. But it's like, if you have to be able to show that, you have to be able to, not that, all of these things can still happen, even though you did reasonable mitigation efforts. But too many times boards are just saying, we're not going to deal with it. And communities get aggressive at some of these meetings, right? They get really outspoken, and board members become intimidated, and they don't want to take these issues on or really to have a full debate with them. But so the administrator was asking me, so what, I said, Dave, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? And I said, well, I, a few things I would do, right, is I don't know what communication came out to you, said administrator, from your higher ups and from the board on this, any meetings that you might have had, anything that you had. But I mean, it's kind of like, right, like here's another thing that is a downfall for a lot of school administrators and schools is they get really poor guidance from their state organizations. So they pay all of this money into these state organizations to be a member of, and then the state organizations aren't saying, hey, like here are specific ways that we recommend that you check your compliance with social distancing, and here are specific messaging. Here are some template letters that we have crafted, like with our legal counsel, and because you're a member paying all this money in and putting in this big pool of money that we have, and so we're going to try to help you out on this. No, that stuff isn't there. So people are just like, whoa. And again, remember, as we went back to the start of this, it's the counties who are really supposed to be at the lead of this, right? Who are supposed to be telling the districts you can be in person or not. You should be wearing masks or not. And the counties pretty much faded away after they got pushed back. So one of the administrators was showing me, and I said, what do you do? He said, the county gave me permission to look up contact tracing. So I can find anybody like in the county and let them know if if they're, so if a kid was close contact with another kid, I can let the family know and all of that. And if the family says like, well, our relatives were over, like there's this whole process, like in this dashboard where you can do this at the county. And I said, well, how do you have access to that? Like, that sounds like something I've never had access to that. How did you come about this? He said, the county doesn't want to do it anymore. So they just like gave the school the password. I'm like, holy smokes. Like you're looking up everybody's personal information and you're being able to tag people through this network and say, hey, like, you need to watch yourselves for symptoms and self-quarantine because you've been in close contact. And I'm like, that's not the way the system's supposed to work. I mean, that's completely crazy for that to happen. But yet, it's kind of where these systems are at. So I think we're going to see more of these stories start to be revealed once these lawsuits come out. You're going to see how absolutely dysfunctional and just the white flag that was thrown up by the counties. And that's where I kind of go back on this right away, is that, the counties just bailed. And then the districts they're like, we don't know how to handle like this, like how are we supposed to contact trace and what are the expectations? And that's part of it. And the other part is like a district just saying, hey, a lot of money, we're just putting in an artificial turf here at our stadium, which they're not hiding, right? they're not hiding that at all. So what the lawsuits are also saying is that the districts failed to follow CDC guidance. Now, the issue with that is, right, the CDC guidance is just that, it's guidance. The CDC doesn't issue directives to school districts. So from a legal standpoint there, that's not going to hold. There's no obligation for a district to follow CDC recommendations. Now, what the argument would be likely is, well, there wasn't any state or local, like county stuff. So this was, at least they would have followed something, but I doubt that's going to go very far, right? Because again, there are a ton of federal recommendations. Working in school safety for 20 plus years, like federal recommendations. Hey, like you should lock your doors to your school. Like only one state requires, I think it's Georgia. Like the rest of them don't. So the guidance argument is going to kind of fall apart. But here's where it'll start to unravel for school boards and schools. If schools don't show that they deliberated this topic, right? If they just like said yes or no on a vote for mask, but they didn't document, they didn't deliberate things like, how would we test in our school building if masks are making a difference? How are we going to train, or educate staff, professional development, and students about masks and parents? Like, if you can't show that, then yeah, I wouldn't want to be in that camp. So yeah, it's basically, it's going to be discovery. and discovery from a legal term of saying, yeah, show us your board minutes that you can document that this was happening, and also, administrators, show us your professional development, any handbooks, any videos. They're going to be asking, kids this question too. So, like, how did you know, like, to wear a mask? How did you know where to stand in line? Like, was there how many times did you wash your hands during the day? Or what happened if somebody didn't have their mask off? Was somebody coming in and saying, hey, like, you have to put your mask on? So, I mean, all of these things will be happening. So this is, for me as a school safety expert, this is a different area, right? Because in school safety, where you had weapons, for example, right? That the concern of somebody bringing a gun to school or ramming a school, there's going to be these devices that you would purchase, bollards and cameras and those types of things, which were pretty hot selling tickets. But the, that was largely effective, or these door barricades, or bizarre locking systems, window films, so they couldn't be shot out and stuff like that. But the likelihood is those systems would never be tested in a real authentic environment. And now it's different though, right? Because if you're in the school safety side and someone's saying, well, I'm going to sell you this backpack that'll you can spray this mist around, which is antiviral and things like that. Like, if I'm selling that, there's much more liability for me, because it's likely that whether this is being used or not, because of fidelity issues of all of the areas and surfaces and frequencies and keeping schedules of how often things are being cleaned, and just the fact of our kids being compliant, staff being compliant. Like, I could be in trouble with this, right? Like, if a district says, hey, like, you're litigating against us in this, but we purchased $200,000 worth of backpack sanitizers and the packs to go around, or virus stuff to go around, and our custodians have been doing that. So, like, this company was telling us it was going to knock down the stuff, so we don't know. Or they said they would come in and assess it to see if it would. So those are the questions that are going to come up, and it's why these companies are kind of on the sideline. Think about it. If you go to a big box store, like a home improvement store, have you gone down the aisle, like the HVAC aisle, where the furnace filters are, and seen end caps and displays and said, hey, like, get your antivirus filter, like, here it is, made by whatever company? And no, like, we haven't seen that. But why not? If you saw it, if somebody marketed that and said, this is we're claiming that this decreases virus in your, in the air in your home and stuff, people probably would buy it, right? That stuff would sell out. But why don't you have that? So, some of the questions is, one, it's hard to get product. Yes, that's part of it. But the other part is, like, if you were to actually make things to that specification, it wouldn't work with home heating systems, right? Like, if you were to put that in your house, your furnace would die. It would burn out, and then you'd be like, I'm suing you because this filter made it too hard for my furnace to suck air through. So these companies are like, well, we're going to sit this one out. And it's absolutely bizarre, to me, that we haven't seen kind of more targeted marketing. So let me go over here into the chat, and it is Bacon who said, masks are supposed to help, though the vax we're all supposed to get doesn't work against it. Everything is still open and there's no distancing. So, and that's the thing, right? Like, it is. Welcome, Cameron Sanchez, by the way. Welcome, Cameron Sanchez. Yeah, there isn't social distancing anymore. I mean, what was it I wrote about it in my book? I think it was in May, like May 13th or something, when the CDC basically said, it's over, and, wear a mask if you haven't been vaccinated, but largely like everything else. And that lasted for a while. But so yeah, this is really bizarre. Cubic feet per minute SAST on how much air can go through. So that's so right. Like, there isn't, the companies aren't going to put something out there when they know that upon its immediate use, if it destroys your furnace, right, your furnace motor burns out, they're going to hear about it. The store is going to hear about it. So it's one thing if you're putting bollards in front of a school or a surveillance camera, because if something goes wonky with that down the road, it's distanced, right? Like from the time the money, the check has been cashed and stuff. But I mean, you start selling like these MERV 13 furnace filters and you're not checking the airflow. I mean, you could be sued into oblivion. And not only that, the companies that sell these things, the home improvement stores, would get a bad rap for that. So they don't want to deal with that. And then, of course, schools, like this whole thing of like standalone systems. Well, you got 1,000,000 square feet and you got a standalone ionizer, whatever it is. I mean, like, we know that's how not going to be effective. And also, we know environmental services isn't coming in to check this and saying, oh, yeah, like it's decreasing the amount of virus and other things in the air. Like they're not doing that, right? So it becomes this whole quandary for schools right now of like, what should be foreseeable? What should you have anticipated? What would be a reasonable attempt to mitigate that? And as I said, wiping down, you had money. It's not that you didn't have money for this. You had millions of dollars. So, would it have been these antiviral laminates? Would it have been, sanitizing these high contact areas more? I mean, putting in sinks in bathrooms, soap, changing up your schedule in a school? Like, even if a school would come forward and if they were litigated against and said, we did have masks and we can't make, if somebody doesn't wear a mask and we would become aware of it, we would let them know we were modeling mask wearing. And by the way, we changed our schedule to give longer time between hallway time breaks. And we had teachers encourage students then to use the restrooms, and we had more hand sanitizers out. I mean, if you're presenting something like that, it's like, that's a due diligence district. Like that's stewardship. Like they're trying to do things. But so those will be the questions that are coming in on this. Is it's going to be very, very difficult also for parents to say, back in 5 months ago, my child tested positive for COVID, had symptoms, and because they were going to school, and so that, I mean, there isn't that level of contact tracing that exists in these places. So what they're going to try to do, right, is just to say that a school made a decision to either mask or not mask, and then never did any testing to see if it was effective. It's both ways. Like if you mask, just because you mask doesn't mean that the school would be safer, right? Because unless you're taking data, unless you environmentally test, unless you're testing the air, unless you're testing surfaces, you don't really know, right? You wouldn't know. So these will be the parts that will come into play. I can tell you the states will be like, whoa, like we don't want any part of this. We don't want to jump into this. They're going to wait for the Fed to try to make some decision. I don't know if the Fed will make any decision, but if they do, and kind of, I think as Sast was saying, like do you really want the Fed, the U.S. Department of Ed, to jump in and mandate environmental safety in the schools? Do you want that? And what would that look like? And I don't know. So the anxiety right now that I experience when I instruct school leaders is they're saying, if I'm named in litigation, right? If I'm the principal here and someone sues us and says somebody contracted COVID and it's because of the environment we were in, even if we were masked, let's say they believe it happened at school because everybody was masked, but they weren't socially distanced. So maybe they're all in a music room or something. If you're trying to find another job while you're being litigated against something like this, good luck. It's not happening. No place is going to hire you on if something like this is pending, especially when it's going to be framed that there was potentially some foreseeable negligence by the district, even if it's proven. I'm saying these are claims like allegedly, but the suits have been filed and there's going to be many more in the works. Like there's almost like a PAC that is funding some of this. So we're going to, I would say in my state, so we have 421 districts. I would guess by Christmas, half of those will have lawsuits filed against them in this blueprint. So again, what do you do? And if you're a parent, like, what do you do? So as a parent, like, I'm not suffering this fatigue, but it's this fatigue of, I literally get 2 to 3 messages every school day from my kids' schools. And it's like, hey, check your email. And then you go and it's like, your child was in close proximity to a child who tested positive for COVID. If your child is exhibiting symptoms, please keep him or her home and have them test it. And if they test positive, then other members of your family that go to school should stay home until a certain number of days, 10 days, or a negative test, or whatever it is. But you just get inundated with that. And it's like, it doesn't mean anything after a while, right? It's a cover your butt type of thing. And it loses its effectiveness. So I'm like, like, how do you, and the only reason they know, right, is because someone says, I tested positive for COVID, or I'm not coming to school because I tested positive. So then they go back and they look at the schedule and they're like, where were you second hour? Where are you eighth hour? Okay. Or who's your homeroom if you're elementary? Okay. So these are the kids that you were with. And so then they send out a notice. And, but the thing is, like, parents then just lose, it's that thing where you just get inundated with information too much, where it just loses its meaning. And hey, it's Mike Honcho. It is Mike Honcho. My goodness. Holy smokes. It is Mike. Is it really Mike Honcho from over at CRS? If so, man, that is pretty amazing. And by the way, like, I have to get up to CRS sometime. I don't know if you still have a giant spider. It was in the background of your videos last year, but I do need that for Halloween, because I do have another giant spider here, but I only have one and I need the other one. So if it's up there, I gotta make a trip there and snag that giant spider. So I don't know. So yeah, it is crazy. So again, kind of of where we're at with this is, it's a DAM break right now for litigation. It was going to happen at some point, and now it's happening. And it is this massive group of parents all in the same template coming forward and saying, schools, listen, like, you should have known better. This was foreseeable. If kids and staff weren't wearing masks, people are going to get COVID. And so that's part of it. But again, like, even if you wore a mask and it's like, well, maybe there was a time when the fourth grader didn't have his mask on, or you didn't have mask at recess, or there somebody on the bus, the kids weren't wearing masks and no one was enforcing it. So all these situations will come out. Schools are going to have to really get on their game. They're going to have to sit down right now. Like, and this is one thing I've been helping a few districts with, not trying to help them evade this, but just say, I'm just trying to give them a prep of saying, like, here's what to anticipate in discovery, right? Like, I've been through discovery, working in, with legal cases and things. And I said, here's likely what they're going to ask for. So if you have any professional development with this, and if I don't think we're far away from seeing school districts who will immediately then turn around and litigate against the county. And they'll bring in this triangle, right? They'll say, like, we're being litigated against because we had to make a judgment because the county didn't do their job of advising us on this. Like our COVID numbers and the community and coming in and off, setting up testing sites and doing that. So, like, the ship's not going down alone here. Like, we're taking the county down with us. So I would expect in some cases, or some lawyer will figure this out, or they'll watch this and be like, God, Dave's got a good idea there. And they'll go right back and say, listen, this is because of you neglecting your duty. We did the best we could, but it's like trying to put out your neighbor's house with a fire hose, and then they sue you. They're like, you didn't do a good job. Like, you put too much water on this side. If you would have put it on the roof and whatever, it would have survived. And be like, well, I called the fire department, but they didn't come out here, so I did the best I could. Like, this is kind of not my area. Like, here, working this, trying to put your house out with a hose. And so it's kind of that's like an analogy, right? Of when you're looking for the county, and the county then should be expending resources to come in and objectively assess this type of, and they should be in charge of contact tracing. They shouldn't be giving the password over to a school district. I was instructing a legal class, and one of my students said, who is in this role in a district, and he said, hey, you want me to bring it up on the screen? I said, God, no, like, don't bring it up on the screen, but like, if this is authentically happening, like, I guess show me the interface, and so at least I have an awareness of what and also, like, dude, do you want to take on the responsibility of doing this? He's like, well, I think I'm, it's better that I do it than it not get done. I said, yeah, but I mean, again, it's like, this is, is this something you should even be dabbling in here, this magic science of trying to figure out contact tracing and using this network. I mean, it's like a Ouija board. I mean, you never know what you're going to release with this thing. I mean, it's just crazy. So yeah, Mike Concho says, yeah, then they'll sue for water damage. Yeah. So I had a scenario, it's like 2 years ago. My neighbors, the windows were open on their house and they were gone. It was like midday and their fire alarm, the smoke alarm was going beep, 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 beep. I'm looking over and I'm like, that's coming from their house. So I start walking around their house and, they've got the cameras outside and stuff. So I'm like, oh, if you see me, I'm like, I hear like a beeping noise. I'm just trying to figure out if your house is on fire. So I'm like, do I call the fire department? I don't see any smoke. I mean, like, I'm pretty sure like we're in good shape here. Cause like, but so monitoring their house for like 45 minutes until like, the batteries die or whatever. But I'm like, should I be calling 911 or, what's the protocol? What's the protocol here? I'm not really sure what to do, but I used to be a firefighter. So I'm kind of thinking, the windows were open. It's a 2-story building with the draft. Like that building, if the house wasn't really starting to show any smoke in 45 minutes, are probably good. So, but yeah, I did tell them, like, yeah, it was over. And yeah, your smoke alarm. So it's kind of monitoring your house. So if you see me on your surveillance, I wasn't scoping out the place. I was just listening for the smoke alarm, whatever you got going on there. Like, something's wrong. So, but yeah, it's just crazy. So let's get into SAS Too Many. So SAS wrote, contact tracing is the gateway drug to social credit scores. And you know what? I posted quite extensively about social credit scores in other people's threads, right? In other people's forums, like so, and discussions. Hey, Sir Brian Bowden from New York. Brian, by the way, I wrote a chapter about Brian in the book, The Velocity of Information. So there's a company that printed this off for me. So this is actually going to be in hard copy, paperback, ebook, and audio book. So that's cool. So yeah, it'll have a different design to it too. Like, I sent this out to a lot of people. Are like, is that actually the design? Is that your cover? I'm like, it's just a concept design. But the book is done. Like, this is actually the completed book with 471 endnotes, and it's 255 pages and graphics stuff. But Brian, I interviewed Brian Bowden, and there's a chapter about Brian in the book. And when he was still in New York City, right, Brian, and he was going out and talking during the onset of the lockdowns in New York of like what was happening, like what's happening in stores. And it's a really great chapter. One of the quotes from Brian is the best quote in the book. He said, it's like going into a store in March of 2020, where he lives in New York, was like David Byrne, the Talking Heads, where people just kind of shuffle their way back from you. Like, I don't want to be by you because you might have a virus and whatever. But yeah, it's a terrific chapter. It's great. So thankful to Brian for that. So SAS was saying, this gateway to social credit scores. Well, the reality is I posted pretty aggressively on social credit scores because it does seem right that if you're there are so many indicators right now that are kind of coming into this fiscal monitoring, right? $600 transactions and contact tracing, where you are and where you've been. Anyway, social credit scores. If you go on and look for Tom Scott, did a video on YouTube in 2018, December 2018, about social credit scores. It's a fiction one. And actually, I think Tom, I think I was commenting on it of saying, this is pretty accurate to how this would actually be rolled out of, how you would up your score would be public under his fictional video. So let's say it was 0 to 100. So like if you're in the 80s, like that would be good. You'd be able to, get loans for a vehicle. You'd be able to travel and, these other things. But if your score dropped below a certain level, kind of like if it does in China, like you don't have access like to the train if your score drops below 70 or something. So then how do you keep your score up? What are things that you do to keep your score up? Well, some of it is compliance, right? and or volunteering or things like that. And there's also this thing of like disassociation. So like if you have a relative or friend or whatever, and um, they are in trouble with the law, or they're being non-compliant with areas we're being asked to be compliant in, and you would file this formal note of disassociation to increase your score because you're no longer associated with them. So it is pretty scary stuff. And I know so Tom Scott put in his video, which is only, I think, like 7 minutes long. It's really good. Social credit scores. Tom Scott YouTube. So he put in his video like, hey, there's been a lot of like conspiracy theorists like have said that this is authentic and it's not. And I'm thinking, it's kind of like a shout out to to me. Like I never said this was authentic, Tom, but I am saying, again, as a PhD researcher, that what you've laid out here is a pretty close model for how people might follow, or how this might actually roll out. So it is weird. Like you could actually, for example, it's not a big step in a school system to say, hey, we would do a pseudo social credit score for our students, right? If you're wearing your mask during the day and you wash your hands twice, you get 1 point for the day. And if if you're not wearing your mask and you get a reminder for that, then there's there's an entry that's made and you lose 0.2 points or whatever. I mean, it wouldn't take long to put together some kind of system saying, you want to be up in this range of so many points. And then if you are there, we will periodically, have ice cream at lunch, or we'll do drawings for school apparel or a Pizza Hut certificate or whatever. And you'll be in the running for that. And like schools kind of do that with attendance anyway, especially at high school. Like, I think one high school, they a couple of years ago, if you had attendance where you missed like 2 days or, 2 days, 1 day, or no, you didn't miss any, you were in the drawing for like a truck. And the district said, well, guess what? Like us paying at that time, maybe $20,000 for this truck was less than paying a truancy officer and going to court and these other things, which, is maybe costing us $45,000. And so we're going to put this carrot out there of a truck. So you can find that. Like if you find it, put it in the comments somewhere. Cause I'd be pretty interested to, to read that story again. But, so going back, so Mictobus wrote lots of public record sites out there already trying to aggregate a score for everyone. Yeah. So like that's, any of the credit agencies, right? Like we all have credit scores. I mean, the other thing is GIS data, global information systems. I talked about this on PBS, that all of us have car insurance, right? Or property insurance, but let's say car insurance. Like the car insurance company knows how many vehicles get stolen a year where you're at, how many hailstorms there are, floods and all. They know all of that. They know it down to not only your zip code, but down to your neighborhood. So this information is really, really starting to come in. So Brian Bowden wrote, we are in the midst of a revolution against the social monster. So yeah, I wrote about Hobbes' Leviathan in School of Airs. Hobbes' Leviathan. So Hobbes was from England in the 16th century, saying, you know what, eventually these companies or government, right, as government gets too big, like people want some government, but then it gets too big and you have to decide how you're going to take on the Leviathan. And yeah, I mean, I would have never thought we would be at this point of this type of government mandates or dictates, right? Of saying the moratorium on evictions and stuff like that. And again, coming back to where we're at with the school money, the billions of dollars going out to school, the fact that there was virtually no guidance on that. I mean, again, like I talked about a school that put in artificial turf on their football field and just said, yeah, well, then kids can be out on the field more because the regular turf is not accessible throughout the year as much because it rains and it gets muddy and stuff like that. And I'm like, whoa, like that actually worked. Like in my years as an administrator, you had to come up with a much better argument than that to have that fly. I'm like, how in the world did this go? Like, how is that not challenged? And they're like, no, it's too bad. It's too bad. It's there. So let's see. The Bacon writing, or Cameron wrote, there'll be competition on who can get the lowest score. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Or if they'll just like, if you get below like 50, it won't show anymore. That's kind of funny. There'll be a competition who can get the lowest score. Yeah. Bacon, Mictobus wrote, any algorithm can be exploited. Certainly. Right. And like on my vehicles right now, I mean, one of the things, when I purchased my vehicles, I remember the dealership saying, a benefit is like teen driver, like you can track everywhere the vehicle has been and all this other stuff. I'm like, oh, like really? Yeah, just go in and you can print it all off. And I'm like, even if I'm not, so I'm like, okay, that they have that, the insurance companies have, I mean, like all of this stuff. I mean, all of the vehicles have the audio in them right now, and things like that. It's really a weird, and what would it take to shut something like that down, right? Where you can't get your vehicle to start because a code's been sent out and it's like, you're not driving that day, you've hit your carbon credit. I mean, it's kind of bigger things. John Steele at the Safety Doc Podcast. What do you think of Aaron's suggestion that the unvax should wear a yellow star when in public? I didn't hear that. I listened to a couple of Aaron's podcasts recently though. So I talked, so I, right. Obviously I don't think anybody should, I'll go back to Clay Martin's Concrete Jungle, right? So Clay Martin's book, Concrete Jungle, where he said, don't show your affiliations in public. And that was a time a couple of years ago of saying, don't, because you never know how someone is going to perceive that and whether they're going to take out violence on you, or, you put some bumper sticker on your car of like NRA or whatever, you come back and your tires are slashed, your windows are smashed out. So he's just saying, don't advertise your affiliations because you don't know. And you don't know how, right, someone is going to respond to that, law enforcement, if there's any video and how that might be framed. I mean, so his best thing was to kind of stay gray man. So like, that's why it's now. I talked to one of my friends in Germany a couple of days ago because there was the news article saying in Germany, people were actively wearing like the yellow star in public to identify if they were unvaxxed. And he said, yeah, that's not very prevalent, but he said it is a wristband that people are wearing. So that's different. Like, no, it's a wristband. It's not this thing. I'm like, I don't know if they have to, if they're required to do that, if it's voluntary or, but yeah. And so this comes into a question for school, right? What if schools said, as a solution, the school board comes together and they said, listen, if a student can't provide documentation of vaccination, now in my state, that's not required. It's required in California, right? And there are exemptions to that. But let's say that a school board, your closest level of government, can be more restrictive. They say, listen, we are not going to allow anybody in unless they can prove that they've been vaccinated. And if you haven't been vaccinated, you're going to wear, this band, and that way we can identify if we will test you every day that you come in. We will do a rapid test. That would be wild, right? Like, but I think some people will start to go there. Some school boards are going to really be panicked by these lawsuits. You're a Board of Education member. You're maybe making $2,000 a year by serving on a board. I mean, that might be generous, but you might be making $2,000. So like you can be sued individually. Most boards have insurance. Most board members are told to have additional insurance, but this might be what their legal might tell them. Okay, go really restrictive then. But then what does it look like for FERPA rights? What does it look like for HIPAA rights? Like I shouldn't know somebody else's health status just walking in and out of a school. Like I shouldn't know if a child has a seizure disorder or has type 1 diabetes and so these questions are out there. Now the part is, like, you would think in a functioning situation, functioning society, this would be litigated, right? This would go to the circuit courts, go to local court, get kicked up to a circuit court, and they would make a ruling on it. But they're not doing it. They're kind of like, we're not taking this stuff on right now. And the other part with schools is the open records request. So freedom of information. And I was talking with an attorney today about this. And I used this as a case study Saturday when I was teaching. And I said, you know what? There are a lot of districts right now. And I gave examples, small districts, 1,000, 2,000 kids. They get a request for information. How many staff, how many students notified you that they had tested positive for COVID? And they're like, in order for us to release that, you have to pay us $15,000 because we have to have our head of IT do that. And it's going to take this many hours and we have to redact information. So they put up this prohibitive number, which of course their legal is telling them to do. And they're like, okay, like if you don't agree to that, you can appeal to us, the district, and the district can say, no, this is what it costs because we need this person to do it. Now, district is supposed to say the person with the least amount of cost associated with being able to access those records, so that understands confidentiality and stuff like this. But some districts they'll just go, like, it'll say it has to be this person who's making $150,000 a year, and we'll amortize it to an hourly rate or something and whatever. But so it's crazy. So then the person making the request can bump it up. And this is like newspapers too. Like, and sometimes there's attorneys involved, and they'll be like, they can bump it up, and they can try to get it to a county to pressure the school. So school has 15 days to respond. They have like 45 days to of what they're going to do, and like 45 days to comply. And then, but the counties will say, we're not taking this on. Like, we've got other stuff going. So school, this is not a big issue, and we're not going to put our necks out for this. And so then, like, if you can't get it there, if you're trying to get it to a state court, or you're trying to like kick it up to a circuit court, so it's just not happening. Like, attorneys are saying, we're not dealing with this, and these courts are like, we've got other things going on, so the priority is gone. And districts know this, so they know that they can put this barrier up, and the attorneys know it, and it's happening all over. Like, I didn't have one case study, like I brought up numerous from my state just recently, of districts of coming up with these huge numbers of saying, if you want this information, it's going to cost you this much. So there's also this thing of you don't have to, there aren't consequences for not complying with the law. Now, when you have board meetings, Board of Education meetings, they're supposed to be noticed. There's something called an open part of the meeting and a closed meeting. There are conditions for that. There's this thing called Robert's Rules of Order, right, of how to run a meeting and things like that. And that's not being followed either in a number of places. Like, they're holding meetings, they'll address a mask mandate, and it won't be on the agenda. So they'll just be like, oh, we're hoping we don't get a lot of people to oppose this. So, because we didn't put it on the agenda, we'll bring it up at the meeting and we'll vote on it, and then we'll just quickly exit. And I've watched some of those meetings where they've been recorded. I watched one that happened on September 28th in my state, and it happened just like that. And it was completely out of order. And one person on the board was kind of like, hey, I'm not sure, like, this is a process. They're like, boom, adjourned, gone. And so it's that thing too. There's this lack of accountability. States aren't pressing down. State Department of Education pretty much vanished, gone, as far as trying to do oversight to this. The feds aren't going to regulate the states. So, when districts feel that they can, this is the mode of operating, they can, I don't want to say get away with it, but it kind of is that they don't have to have fidelity in how they're running their board meetings, and this fiduciary responsibility to stewardship for the millions of dollars individual districts are getting for COVID relief. It's really kind of unraveling. Like, for me as a career in this area, to just see it all of a sudden just kind of go, just kind of gone. So let's go over here into Mike Honcho. Good chat, man. You have a good night. Thank you, Mike Honcho. And if you do have that giant spider, you know how to get a hold of me, and I know how to get a hold of that giant spider. Cameron, so the bacon, the rumor mill has it that COVID replaced all other diseases and sickness. So yeah, I noticed today, right? I noticed today, like the message came out with aspirin, not the message. I don't know, I think it's from the FDA, right? Saying, hey, like we're telling you to take aspirin if you're elderly. The micro dose of aspirin, you don't have to do that anymore. It doesn't help you out. Like, what the hell? Like, you gotta be kidding. And honestly, yesterday morning I went shopping and I had aspirin on my list, and I bought aspirin just for that purpose, of taking the regular microdose of aspirin. So I'm like, that's been around for like 20 years, right? I mean, you could put it in the chat and now you're not supposed to take aspirin. So, it's really weird messaging going out. Sast wrote, we got a taste of it last year with the kids being stuck at home. You need the ability to have one parent not work. It's a full-time job, at least with the younger kids. Yeah. So, and that's the thing with these school boards is schools are realizing, they come into this year and they're like, we're going to offer in person for parents that want in person. We're going to offer remote for kids that want remote. And I'm like, ooh, like that model's not going to work because you don't have additional staff. How are you going to make this happen? All of these different sections of what's happening at a virtual and an in-person, and then you just start to see schools toggle on and off. Like, we're going to have in person, and suddenly we're going to have a week off, or they'll say like, we're going to have a week off so we can sanitize the school. Well, good luck with that. Like, because it's really the moment the kids come back in, the school would be impacted again. So it's crazy from that standpoint. And this is where I think it gets really shaky really fast for schools, right? If the argument starts to be proven, or a couple examples are made by schools publicly by lawyers of these parents where they're like, we asked the school if they identified areas of surfaces, if they sampled for COVID, and the school said they didn't. And, it's not in their board minutes and their environmental, and they just flat out said they didn't. And we said, do you do this for mold? And they said, yes. Do you do this for MRSA? And they said, yes. But you don't do this for COVID. Is there a reason you don't do it for COVID? And, and again, you could subpoena, you could bring in a company, any company, and that does environmental in this area. And a lot of them now advertise specifically that they provide this service and say, environmental company that you've worked with this district, correct? Right. This district contracts you to assess for mold in mold spores in the air, like in the HVAC systems and MRSA and all of that. And you do that. Yes. Have they contacted you about virus, or have you made that service aware to them or whatever? And, it's be like, we haven't been contacted. We haven't been contracted. District, you've received X number of $1 million. Tell us why. Help us to understand why you have done this testing for mold and done this testing for MRSA, and you haven't done this testing for COVID, right? Just help us. So imagine you're trying to have this discussion, and it's going to be the attorneys for the district is probably going to, try to fumble something together, for that. But from a public relations standpoint, it really looks bad for a district to not be able to answer that, especially if you're a district where you're like, but we have a really nice football field. Like, we're 7-2 this year because of the artificial turf. It's so then again, it becomes this thing. It's called foreseeable tort. Again, I'm not an attorney, but I do cover this in my classes. Foreseeable tort. Could the argument be made that because schools would be in session, 400 kids in a building in close proximity in hallways and lunch and that you would have anticipated, contamination of these areas? And then what would you do to identify that contamination, and what would you do to mitigate it? And then also to test that whatever you're doing to mitigate it works, as having some impact. And if it's not, then how would you pursue additional mitigation? And that's the mistake these boards go through when they hire or they ask these doctors to come in. They contact the clinics and say, come in and tell everybody why they should wear a mask. And the doctors come in and they do their presentations. And that just kills trust, right? With people in the audience, community members, parents and stuff, because it's very clear that's called positionality. That's the school bringing in the big hammers to basically hammer down the point of, we know more than you. And, here's the 3 doctors who are going to tell you to wear a mask. And you don't have, again, your environmental people coming in saying, here's what we're going to do to here's her, or even like, here's mitigation things. Like, here's a new spray that we're going to use, or here's some way that we're going to test on aerosols, or here's some new, whatever it is. Like, those are the people I would trust. Not that I wouldn't trust the doctors necessarily, but I want to hear from those people. I want to be like, how are you actually going to pull this off on buses and in schools and during basketball games when people are in a gym and running up? How are you actually going to pull this off, and how are you going to measure it? Instead of just having the 3 doctors come in and say, yeah, you got to be masked up. And then the question comes in with the doctors, right? the follow-up question would be, how do you determine what is an effective mask? Like, raise my hand. Like, how I could imagine that. I mean, how do you determine what's an effective? Well, a mask should be whatever, but how do you determine that? Like, is there actually a way when a kid comes in, 400 kids, right, as they walk through the door, that they could do some type of like, well, breathe out or deep breath in, deep breath out, and you could have some machine that measures. None of that exists. It could exist, right? But or is it then your responsibility to say, if you want to come in, as Board of Education, you're having students come in, you're going to provide a mask each day, and the mask will meet this criteria, right? So you have inter-student reliability, inter-staff reliability. You don't have someone taking a pair of underwear with a rubber band as a mask, right? So at least you would have that. At least you could come forward and say, well, God, Dave, that's expensive. Yeah, but you got like millions of dollars from your relief fund that you spent on your football field and your weight room and other stuff. I mean, we couldn't get the stuff. I know that's not accurate, because I know that the vast number of administrators I've talked with have indicated, yes, they do have access to those supplies. And if you couldn't get those supplies, and right, you're trying to get them, and I mean, then at least you could document too that, we were trying to get these supplies and we couldn't get them. So then it becomes a supply issue for the county or the state or the federal government to work on. But you can kind of see where this stuff goes, and it's unraveling very, very quickly. So what's going to happen? Our schools will quickly, right, are going to go to mask mandates. Like, they're going to see what's happening to the districts around them and be like, I don't want to be involved in what's happening over there. Like a Board of Education where someone is making, $200 a month to be on a school board is going to be like, I don't want to be involved in this massive litigation and be tied up in this. And it's not like you can the other thing is, like, the school board member could say, like, I'm done, you resign. Well, you were there when the decisions were made. You're still culpable. You're not getting your name removed off of that lawsuit. So, so the question, comes up of who's going to be running for these boards in these situations. And oh my God, it gets so crazy. But you're going to see mask mandates. I think there's this, well, I don't think, but I mean, there's this wide open opportunity for vendors to come in, environmental vendors, and really push into districts and make it overt. Or even, if I was an environmental vendor and I'm marketing myself, I would go right to the local news in these districts, and I would say, listen, we offer this service, and make it so it is social proof, so it is perception of value that we can offer this service. I mean, I think right now in some meeting rooms or some virtual Zoom rooms or Skype rooms or whatever around the country, like, these meetings are happening right now, saying we have an opportunity here in the next couple of weeks to come in and really position ourselves as the people that can get a handle on this and sell our products and whatever. And whether there's merit to that, I don't know. I think a lot of these environmental services are on the up and up. They know the equipment. They've, like, the mold and MRSA mitigation. I mean, when they get involved in that, like, they do a very thorough job, and they're very skilled at doing their presentations. So we did these additional samplings of whatever in the Petri dish and whatever. It's not. There's some science behind that. It's not like putting bollards or just a surveillance camera up. So that's going to be happening. And then this big thing of, are parents going to be sending kids to school, when this stuff hits the media more? Are you going to see polling out for homeschool or into, charter school settings, which might be smaller? I mean, this will happen rapidly. And you're going to have districts right now who are thinking, oh God, like, it's winter, northern part of the US. We got to close the doors down. We got to shut the windows and stuff like that. Is it better that we just, from November to February, if we just go online again, just for the fact that then we can say, we don't have kids in the building and we don't have contact. So is that a move that districts are going to go with? But all of these things are suddenly on the table again. So let me go back to the chat. Mictibus wrote, the only thing that bothers me about this whole discussion is that we're all assuming that the COOF is a real threat, which it has been proven many times it's not. So yeah, obviously I I am not going to be able to comment on that. I think McDivis, though, right? I mean, something that is completely absent in the school dialogue is saying that the virus lasts this long on this surface, or it's aerosol based for this long. Like those two things, like you think everybody would know. Like that would be so redundant. It would be in commercials, it would be out in flyers to people. And like that was there for MRSA and for mold. Like people were very aware of how long those things lasted and things like there. And to be this far into the situation we're in and to not have those two things of saying hard surface, here's a hard surface, here's a desk, and 48 hours, and aerosol 27 hours, right? Like to not have those numbers is peculiar, because it seems that you would have those numbers, that they would be produced from government or even environmental sources, right? Like somebody, those numbers would just be out there and pretty easy to find at this point. Like you think you'd have that. But so that's where I'm like, why isn't that there? Like, right. So why isn't that information there? I mean, like, we all know, like, don't leave salad with mayonnaise out for 3 hours in the sun unless you want to get salmonella and be home for the next week. I mean, this is weird stuff. Like, why isn't that information there? And Bacon wrote, let's see here, McTavis, we're still awaiting. So let's go to SAS. SAS, I believe the root beer float disease. So, hey, you watch Pop. And Aaron, was a bioweapon accidentally released in the world? So, I mean, right. So who knows? I mean, even if we take all of that out of that equation of trying to figure out an etiology of really where this got, if we just take like where we're at today and just practices for flu, right? For let's say an aggressive flu season. When I was an administrator, we made sure that we had plenty of soap. We ordered extra soap. We had breaks for kids throughout all of the buildings, extra time to we actually made videos. We the kids made videos, and it was these where they would do the ABC song, A B C D E F G H, or like Mary Had a Little Lamb, whatever it was, and they would make a video where they would be washing their hands, and the thing was like, make sure you wash your hands for this long. We had black light boxes. The high school made them. The high school shop made a black light box and took them down to the elementary schools and would have kids wash their hands, then put their hands into this black light box, right? Which took a day to make. I mean, just a high school kid, they figure this stuff out. And then you could look inside through a plexiglass thing, and you could see your hands. If your hands were like glowing, it still meant you had like bacteria or stuff on it. So you had to go back in and soap up. It was really effective, right? Kids could see that and be like, whoa, like, I'm a second or third grader. Hey, I got to do a better job washing my hands. So like, those are the type of things as I talk about, I'm like, why am I not hearing about that now? Like nobody's talking about that. Nobody's talking about teaching hand washing, even timers for hand washing. Like, why isn't there a vendor that has something where once a kid walks up to a sink in a school, just like the water goes on when you put the hand underneath, why isn't there something that starts to play a song, right? And so that's gives you an idea for how long you're supposed to. I mean, like maybe I'm coming up with a great idea and someone's going to take it and run with it here, but those types of things are completely missing right now. And the things that we would just do in a traditional school year, right? But I remember my school nurses reporting to me that, hey, we have less absenteeism in this year at these buildings or these grade levels. And, it was relational. I mean, it wasn't a scientific study, but we thought it was relational to the fact that we had upped our hand washing and upped our sanitizing stations. Like we put them all over, the buildings, and we, refilling them and stuff like that. Cause I'm like, I'd rather put some money into that than to, have kids out because they're sick and staff out because they're sick. But it's like, right, those types of things. again, like people be like, well, that sounds great. And, but we didn't do that. Well, why not? Like, why not? You had the money, you had those resources available. Again, I talked to environmental services vendors who said, yeah, those types of things are out there. You wouldn't have had trouble getting those in. And I mean, it's soap, right? So, and it's amazing to me. And these are the types of things where in discovery in a legal process, schools will be likely asked by the opposing legal counsel to demonstrate mitigation measures, and those will be mitigation measures. Remember that black box thing? I mean, those were. I remember the high school students that put that together, and first, they showed it to me and said, "Hey, like," and the tech ed teacher said, "Yeah, we could. Well, we'll talk to the principals, and we'll go school to school, and we can do this lesson, and we can have like a visual timer on it too, and all this stuff." And I mean, it was pretty snappy to put together. I mean, it wasn't building a rocket. And then we put it in the newsletter and, got it out to parents. And so if you haven't hit the thumbs up, please do that. Look at this now. So hit the thumbs up. I would appreciate that. Subscribe to the channel. I'd like to, get the channel back. Oh, by the way, here, yes, there's my book, School of Errors, which is still an awesome book. Came out in 2019. School of Errors, Rethinking School Safety in America, 2019. The new book will be out, should be in February, hopefully. So let me do this. I didn't. This has been a little while since I've done this. So, right, like I'm sorry that I'm 1 hour and 40 minutes into a podcast and I realized, hey, I couldn't put people's comments up. It's been a while, right? So, but so from Bacon, hey, this reminds me of seeing the ABC. So I was washing my hands, something that apparently the rest of the population ever did. So yeah, like these are not. So I wrote about this in the velocity of information too. Of like, there's a lot of common sense things that we've always done, which suddenly no one talked about during COVID. Right? We didn't come back to school. We talked about all this freaky stuff coming back to school was of desks that have to be 6 feet apart, and then they're roped off, or they have some plexiglass around them, and they have yellow tape on the floor that you don't step out of your area. Like all that stuff was pretty prevalent on YouTube, and I have quite a few copies of that when stuff was coming out. But it wasn't, hey, like we're gonna ramp up hand washing again. None of that was out there, and it's kind of like, well, why? Like, how in the world did we miss that? Or even at the start of the pandemic, or like, how did we not? Have a national campaign in March of saying, hey, like everybody, like we want you to increase your hand washing. You're showing people hand washing, your celebrities hand washing, instead of saying, hey, like I'm a celebrity and here's a formula for disinfecting my phone because phones are the most gross thing with bacteria and stuff. It's like, it's your phone. Like, it's not a community phone, right? It's your phone. So that doesn't really hold up, like that story, this whole thing, but like the hand washing, right? Of how, I wrote about it in Velocity of Information. There's weird stuff that was missing in all of this, and to this day is missing. Like, I work with a lot of people who work in schools and administrative roles, and I'll say, did you, are you increasing your hand washing? Like, yeah, that's a great idea. I'm like, it shouldn't be coming from me. Like, that should have been internal. It should have been from your organizations right away, or the school nurse for the state, contacting districts and having some kind of campaign. Like, we don't see it on commercials, like, wash your hands. I mean, it's everything else but that. Hey, it's Moose Gal's Corner saying hi to Mictobis, and I believe coming over from Humble Whiskey in Texas, Humble. So welcome, Moose Gal's Corner. So yeah, this is it's really wild. It's wild stuff. So again, we are seeing the kind of the dam break on lawsuits being filed against districts where a parent is claiming, hey, my child was infected with COVID because school, you did not A, require mask, or B, these can be together, A and B, properly mitigate for the virus, which might be, cleaning, sanitizing, things like that. So those things are coming out. We also know that schools have this wide open block grant on how to increase. It's really targeted right for HVAC systems and stuff like that. We know that schools, for example, I talked about it, have bought artificial turf for the football fields and things like that. So this block grant, I haven't seen that as a school administrator. I mean, again, when I was back, the last time we had a block grant was back during the ARRA, American Recovery Act. I know there's an R missing somewhere in there, but it was back in like 2008, 2009, when the stock market died and, the banks almost went under, stuff like that. And this money came out to schools, and it was like, buy American steel and American labor. But there were very strict like conditions on what you could spend that on. And this money is coming out, and I was, I read through it too, like in my class, like I had the bill, and we're going through it. I'm like, you can spend this damn near on, you can justify this almost on anything, right? Like if you can justify it on an outside football field, and saying, well, then, students can get out on the field. It'll be more physically fit. And if you're physically fit, you're less likely to get sick. I mean, that is enough of an argument for the feds to say, yeah, that's good. All right, we gave you $3 million and you made the fitness argument pretty damn convincingly right there. So like, you're good. Yeah, there's literally no audit. There's no sense face validity standpoint. It's like, this doesn't make sense. It's absolutely crazy. So let me go to Gone. I want to say Racine, but there's no E at the end. And welcome, by the way, and subscribe to this channel if you haven't. The channel is coming back in full force here. But yeah, please do that. And I will have some upcoming shows where I'm going to be breaking down parts of the book, Velocity of Information, my book coming out in February with Roman and Littlefield, and going through that. Gone wrote, I wouldn't let my kid anywhere near school nowadays, the way they indoctrinate them, and the fact that they graduate without the knowledge of their history or necessary to survive and thrive says it all. So yeah, one of the things schools significantly struggle with, I mean, when I work with schools is just, what is the baseline with kids when they come in with their math and reading and stuff like that? Like where are you at with that? So, Sass Too Many wrote, I feel privileged to be a part of the Safety Doc podcast Stream of Consciousness. It's always interesting. Well, thank you, Sass. I appreciate that. Sass once did the Cannonball Run, kind of an abbreviated version. It was over kind of when the roads were thinned out during COVID. I think he averaged 212 miles an hour. Very successful Cannonball Run. He had some in-car video of that. I don't know if it's out there. I'm guessing it's not. But he is an extremely good driver. So yeah, just he sees, like, he can see, kind of make predictions 1,000 feet ahead of him, like what he has to do. So you gotta be really good with your tires on that type of stuff. I think part of it comes down to the tires, because your tires can melt. Bacon wrote, wonder if any celebrities listening to Doc might use this to come out of retirement. Hi, I'm Paris Hilton, and I'm here to teach you how to wash your hands. Actually, I mean, Bacon, now that's if you had a celebrity that came out with a hand washing campaign, or even something where they could market into that, right? Or just to do, like this, be on a talk show, or this, it would probably work. I mean, they would get the spotlight out there. And imagine, they're singing a song, like you have Adele or somebody like singing a song and they're like, okay, like that's the time that you should be washing your hands. I mean, so there's little quirky things. Like, as I said, I'm the guy, I'd be the perfect guy to contact for the cover story, right? Of why to make this. Like I said, after the Hawaii missile crisis thing a couple of years ago, and the official narrative after that was we clicked the wrong button. It was only supposed to be an internal practice. I'm like, yeah, but right, your system doesn't it's not that easy to mistake and alert the whole state of an incoming thing. So I'm like, that's not how that works. And then they came up with another story. I'm like, well, that's not how that works either. And then they said, well, the person that's on there, we reassign them, and a week later that the person no longer worked there. And a week later, like, people are saying, we can't even find that person. Like, we type in their name, there's like no address. And I mean, it's like Hawaii, like, right? Like, so it's not like you drive to work from another island or come in on boat or plane, or teleport in. I mean, so it's just weird. So I'm like, come in with me. Like, I'll be your cover story guy. Like, I'll be the person that makes it all make sense. Um, but I mean, part of the cover story guy is just to logically give people a sense of like what you should be doing, like just logically. I mean, it's insane. Um, so Gone wrote, and government programs offering incentives. So I don't know if anybody caught this. I put this out on Twitter, and it was Baton Rouge. So if you go into my Twitter, it's at safety PhD. Let me just put it here at safety. I have the mic. So here we go. Here we go. Okay. So this is me on Twitter at safety PhD. So a couple days ago, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, was running an event, and if you went down and received your Rip Your Float, you could have criminal your record clean, like misdemeanors and felonies to certain levels. Like, so actually, if you go into Twitter, and I reposted that authentic link to, maybe like 2 days ago, it came out, and I'm like, wow. Like, I wrote in the Velocity of Information about how New Mexico did sweepstakes and free hunting license and fishing license and lotteries and all of that. And I thought that was pretty extreme. I didn't know if anyone would come up with an idea of, hey, like, if you receive this, we'll clean your record. So so that felony, where you stole a car 8 years ago, gone. It's gone. I'm like, that is just insane. I would have put it in the book. I mean, I'm like, if that would have been 3 weeks earlier, like, boom, I know exactly where that would have gone. The book's already been accepted. It's being typeset, but absolutely Twitter. But yeah, so Sast wrote, felonies expunged. Yes, kids, you heard that right. Yeah. So it was, it's this bizarro, right? That you'd see that. And what kind of modeling is that sending out? I don't know, to a community. The whole thing was just like, it's hard to believe. I'm like, someone provide an authentic link. I remember, initially finding, and then I found like the authentic website, and it was then covered by the Baton Rouge media. So I'm like, this is actually happening. It was just wild. So I think in my state, they do not require students or staff to have the Rip Your Float. School districts can make that determination with staff. Where I'm at, it's a right to work state, except for a few districts that have unions. So in most cases, school boards can make that determination. But I'll tell you, every administrator I'm interacting with right now on a regular basis, which is about 20 in my state, who are informing me, and in my classes or stuff, they're saying, listen, like, we have no staff. I mean, like, the bus driver, when they get done, they're coming in and they're, monitoring a classroom, and they're helping out in the kitchen. And as a principal, like, I'm subbing. And so, there's this thing too, where school boards are going to be like, boy, if we do this and we lose 5% of our staff or 10%, or if we do this with students and students go and virtually open enroll to a different district, or physically open enroll to a district or private school that doesn't have this. So, I mean, all of these things are really heavy in play. And how districts get funded is student head count. How many students? So it's not like a district just gets X number of dollars. It's based on how many kids they have. So there's this intense open enrollment. And I was thinking too, like, if I was a school administrator in the time of COVID, I would aggressively, through open enrollment and advertising, I would say, listen, here's what our district is doing. Like, yeah, we have cleaners and we're sanitizing, and we have the Solocator apps. So we know I can track where people have cleaned in the building and how frequently that's been done. We have environmental services we've contacted. I mean, if I were to put that out there, that would be a selling point for some parents. Like, definitely, it wouldn't be a detractor. We wouldn't lose parents likely over that, but you would have people coming in because of the perception, right? That social proof of you being able to say, I can print out from the 2 cleaners that we hired exactly a map of where they've been in the building, and those types of things. You can, put a little money into advertising. Schools do that. They advertise against each other to try to lure students for different things. I mean, to be honest, like that school that put the artificial turf in, behind the scenes conversation with that might have been, hey, if we do this, we're going to get open enrollment from some kids that have a grass field because they want to play on turf. Things like that happen. So it's nuts. So Bacon wrote my website, safetyphd.com. Yes, it is. And a story about my website was hacked. My website was hacked about a month ago, and it was hacked by like a pharma thing. So, those I made a post on Twitter, but so like it was right before like I started teaching at the university. So suddenly I'm like, this is, I'm bringing up my website and I'm like, oh no, like all these discount pharma products and things like that. So I contacted my host who, and I said, you got to clean this out. Like, so they did. It took a while though for them to do that. And then I had to contact Google online and had them recrawl it. Now everything's fixed. Like everything's gone. But that really sucked to have that. Cameron wrote, also strange how we don't hear any information on a healthy lifestyle, such as nutrition and exercise. Gyms closed, but fast food seems to stay open. So, Cameron, I wrote in what you are going to think is the greatest book in the entire world here, The Velocity of Information, which will actually come out in a book, right? This is just my bound edition. I wrote a couple chapters about that, and I had Drew Bay, our fitness friend, our fitness expert, help inform me. But I immediately, right, there's a chapter called Fitness and Fortitude, and the U.S. military or the U.S. Army in 2015 had a civilian fitness program. And how this worked is if you're working as a civilian for the military, you could enroll in this and they would give you access to resources, online resources, programs, things like that to help you become more fit, physically fit, diet, things like that. So I'm looking at this program saying, God, like, why didn't we just scale that up for everybody? Like they could have logged in. And then remember these partnerships, like, these companies coming in on the White House. Why not have companies say, hey, like if you log in for 10 days, like you'll get a coupon to Amazon or to, whatever. Or you can post to social media. Like that's a big thing for people, right? They want to prove that they can, that they're doing something. So, hey, like you logged into your site 5 times and you earned a tenacity badge. And we know these things work because like in World War II, people, or World War One, people in Austria on the home front, right? Still at home during the war, they would do these things called the Wehrmann M. Eisen, which I wrote about in the book. Big statues made of wood. So you might have a 10-foot soldier made out of wood, or you might have like a ship made out of wood or something like that. And you'd have this in your town square, and you'd go down and you'd either bring a nail and hammer a nail in, or you'd buy a nail and you'd steal this. Steel as in metal. So you turn wood into steel, and it was this process. Everybody could be seen doing it, and everybody felt they were contributing. And I'm like, so you could have done this, right? People imagine like all your friends, right? Like if some people, they want all this attention anyway, and you're kind of at home and you're not with your job, and you can post on social media, and it's like, you just click a button, boom, and it goes to all your social media stuff. Hey, like Dave just did his 5th login and he earned his tenacity badge. We know this stuff works, like from video game engineers and stuff like that too. And I'm like, why wasn't that there? So I wrote extensively about that in The Velocity of Information and the science behind it, and the fact of like Drew Bay saying, if you're at home and you can contract a muscle, like he's trained, paraplegics and, very elderly people and people with, very unique conditions that prohibit other types of traditional exercises. He said, I've worked, you could have done this, right? Why wasn't that there? And, we've had it in previous instances. World War II, it was Committee for National Morale. World War II, why wasn't that there? I mean, you already have the U.S. Army fitness thing behind the scenes. You could have got a team together and, in a week, you could have had this out there and it would have bought you time. So of people trying to be more fit, right? Drink more water, try to stay, more fit at home, and nutrition things. But, again, like we didn't see that. And how about postal stuff too? I mean, what would it have taken to have postal carriers, as they also deliver a small bottle of sanitizer, right? That there's some ramped up campaign. And as your mail comes in, you're also getting sanitizer once a week for 4 weeks. I mean, all of these things where you're like, yeah, that's it's a hell of an idea. Like, why did nobody come up with that, right? So it's really smart. I mean, that you brought that up, Cameron, because I was thinking the same thing, right? Like, and I wrote about it, and kind of took that apart. So, um, and yeah, put any post down below, anything in the comments area on this, and please subscribe to the channel. I appreciate that. Um, so let's see, Mictobus, if your fish tank is dirty, do you clean it or give the fish medication to make them feel better? Yeah, so that's and that is a good analogy, to like we haven't heard about how schools are either doing the physical cleaning of the environment or how they've modified schedules or things like that to increase the um, I don't know if it would be the safety of the environment, right? But again, if you just say masking up makes you safer, the question is, but who can objectively tell you that? Like your environmental services person could take tests beforehand of what's on surfaces, what's in the air, and then they could have, people once you've gone to masking, they could also take that and compare the two. And no one's doing that. Like that data is not out there. So, and again, there's no inter-student or inter-rater reliability on a mask. You have one kid coming in who's wore the same mask since day one. Like it's 412 days old and it's dirty and it's ripped and it counts as a mask. And you have another student that comes in, who has the full N95 with the pink sides and all of that, and the Darth Vader type look. And so it's like, how do you know? And you don't, right? It's a binary thing of, are they wearing a mask or are they not? So that's this big, and that's really the question too. Like I wrote about it in the book. That would have been something we would have seen at our big box stores, right? When you would have gone in, or the grocery stores, like their insurance carriers would have said to them early on in COVID, listen, like you cannot let people come in that don't have appropriate PPE because it's a liability for us, and have them juggle the mangoes and stuff like that. You can't do that, like, and touch the shopping carts, whatever. So have them come in, give them a mask, give them gloves. Like we will get your supply. So it has, a fidelity to it. Like, and, and when they're done, have a bin that they toss everything into, like a Sharps type bin on their way out. And then someone who's sanitizing kind of those entrances in and out. Like we would have seen that. So a patient cured as a customer lost. So yeah, I don't know where it comes in on the school side. Like the schools, the thing is, like if schools handled this better, right? It's in open enrollment times. It's also a marketing a strategy for schools. Like you could be the school that markets yourself as being very in tune to mitigation processes, and no one's going there. And I mean, it's not that hard to get microban in my Walmart. I mean, there's an entire shelf of microban. It's weird that you don't see that type of that customer perceived value, social proof type thing. It doesn't make sense to me, especially when schools go all out on putting bollards in the front of their buildings to show you, hey, like we're taking school shootings seriously, even though, we're up on a hill and no one's going to drive through the front doors of the school like the way that this is set up. But, you can see it. So yeah, so Mictobus, thanks for putting Drew Bay's website. So yeah, Drew Bay is really helped inform the book. So thank you so much to Drew. And it completely makes sense, right? To why didn't we go with fitness? Even right now in schools, even right now, if I'm trying to mitigate in schools, why, or not why, but I would make the argument of saying I want physical activity. Like, right, we want a little longer recess time for kids because more physical activity. It's an axiom. I mean, these are done through national health studies. More exercise that you receive, it increases your immune system and exposure to the sun. I mean, those aren't hard scientific proofs to go down. I wrote about it in the book. I mean, these are, highly referenced, multiple repeated studies. So, so why not? I mean, be that school of saying we're increasing time, in the outdoors, and we want to increase kids' activity. And then you can come in with your doctors, and you can say, listen, the school is increasing the physical activity in your $2 million instead of like putting your artificial turf in. We're doing more playground, we're putting in some playground equipment, or we're going to um, pave some areas where kids can get out or whatever it is. But, it's like, why in the world aren't we talking more about this? Yeah. So if I'm a doctor saying, the school changed their schedule and they increased kids outside, their time outside by a total of 30 minutes. And when you're outside, we know that it's the Mihong group. I wrote about it in School of Airs. So he has School of Airs, like you could find the study. I wrote about it. It was like the impact of sunlight on kids. And it was basically the more sunlight kids have, the healthier they are and the better they perform academically. And this was a study with like thousands and thousands of kids in different settings and things. But I mean, that's a study. It's like, that's great, but you can't market sunlight, right? Like and it's so the only thing you can market is saying we have lights that are similar to sunlight. But I mean, so that's the thing that doesn't catch traction. But again, I would again say, where's the school district who's stepping forward and saying, we are doing this, and we know that there's this axiom, which is a truth between exercise and sunlight and health. Like, and it's not there. And the other thing is, like, these school districts, again, they are so left out in the dark by their organizations, which they're paying thousands and thousands of dollars, and people have no idea, unless you work in schools administration, right, that you have these school board associations and administrator associations and principal associations and custodial associations, and you're paying thousands of dollars out into these associations and these memberships so they can run these conferences. And what you get back from them is, in my opinion, not worth what you pay in. But right now, they are not coming and helping you. Like, even with these ideas, like what we've talked about tonight, like, you put this on replay to a school board and have them listen to it, and I can guarantee you, if they put 3 of these things into practice, right, they would be much better off than where they're at in 99% of these districts. But it's this weird dance. And if you ever work with legal counsel, because I talked to some administrators, they're like, well, we would ask legal what to do. I'm like, legal doesn't know. Like, legal doesn't know what your school schedule is, and they don't know about sanitizing your schools. I mean, like, they would hire an expert witness if there was ever issues with that. Like, legal doesn't know that. You're overestimating what your lawyer is. And your lawyer, of course, will take the money and, they'll eat up time researching things or whatever. But like, your lawyer isn't the person to tell you how often you should be sanitizing desk and what's reasonable and what's not. That's environmental. Like, your lawyer's not doing that. But I mean, as people get mixed up on like what a lawyer is. And I mean, there were a lot of times as an administrator, I would listen to what legal had to say on stuff, and I'd be like, I'm not going in either of those directions. Like, neither of those makes sense for what I have to do here. So I'm going to do something different. It's just crazy. So yeah, Mictobus was saying a virus is far smaller than a droplet. So obviously, like, just look at that blue label underneath it. Hopefully it won't. I don't think I've said anything which would get this booted off. I think it's been pretty sound, pretty objective. Trying to protect yourself from mosquitoes and a chain link fence. So it makes absolutely no sense. So Mictobus, you're right on though. You're right on, right, of saying, here's if we're asking for a mask in a school setting of 400 kids, and that's like a typical elementary school, right? And elementary schools are built for economy. So they're built to be tightly packed and things like that. If you are doing that, how do you know that anybody bringing in an outside mask, that it's reliable, right? that it is hitting a certain standard where it is preventing, as you speak, aerosol to go out, or as you're breathing in aerosol to go in. And how many times like people just touch their mask with like the outside of the mask has to be contaminated, right? Because you're breathing in and out of it for hours. But um, so that point right there from face validity, which written about extensively in my book, like face validity would tell you if you have 400 kids bringing in mask, and again, the one kid has the same mask that he got at the when he was out shopping 15 months ago, and he has the same one he stuffs in his pocket and pulls out and it's all ripped and stuff like that. And the other, you got another 10% of kids who are a little bit spendy, and they got their mask off of Etsy. Now, granted, I will give Etsy credit because I wrote about it in the book. Etsy, when I did a search in July for facial coverings on Etsy, over 1 million masks showed up. But Etsy right at the top said, none of our vendors are able to make claims about medical effectiveness of their mask. So anything being marketed here, is I don't know, like it's basically apparel, right? So, kudos to Etsy for doing that. But realistically, like people are still buying these masks and passing them off as this is preventing this aerosol intake or other. So this is a big thing. And why don't we know this? Like, why doesn't this instantly make sense to us? Like, when I was shopping at Walmart yesterday in the morning, like there was this lady who clearly doing checkout. Clearly, it was just a folded bandana, and it was open on the bottom. And she's doing, she's the cashier. I'm like, that's not a mask. I mean, that's plus like if you're breathing, right? If you the breath is coming out the bottom because that's the least resistance. Like to try, I mean, just looking at this, I'm like, that's not really keeping anybody safe. I mean, if you're going to spit at me or something like that, I mean, she's a very nice person, but I mean, but like face validity, if things like that aren't making sense. So I think where schools are going to have these discussions that, might be, do we supply the mask, and what would it take to get inventory, which I've been told they've been able to do. And what would it take for cost? And again, schools had money that was coming in from this. And at what point does the state jump in on this, or does a county do this, or does a consortium of districts do this? What is the advice from the Board of Education on this? If you're a board member and you've just been sued, if you've been named in litigation, like that's a big thing, because litigation like this will draw out, right? Because there'll be a lot of discovery. What did you consider? What didn't you consider? What happened at the schools? All the stuff that we talked about. And it's not, and then these parents are going to be angry coming to these meetings because they don't want to be in the newspaper, and they don't, that their district, and well, was my kid involved in this too? And why didn't you do this? Or what are you doing? Or all of a sudden, and the other parents will say, now it's a knee-jerk reaction. Now we are masked because of this one person that litigated. So like, this is, if you're a board member, holy smokes, like this is around me, like there are a number of board members who just like resigned. I'd be like, I'm done. And there was a board meeting where it was masking or not masking, stuff like that. And they ended up like calling the police to escort the board members and the administrators out of the building. That was 2 weeks ago in my state. So I talked to the administrator in that. He's like, yeah, they kind of formed like this little barrier around me and kind of got me out of the building. And holy smokes, dude. But wow. Cameron wrote, you'd think that schools would also limit total enrollment is such a huge issue. Yeah, it's a good point. So Cameron, like, so total enrollment as far as like number of kids in a building, or would you go like every other day, like, Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday would be everybody working from home, virtual day, and cleaning the schools. Like, would there be staggered ways to do this, or limiting and say, it's going to be like kind of random process, and some kids will have to be virtual and it's not. And the reason schools, I think, don't do that is, and makes sense, like what you're saying completely makes sense, is it's this open enrollment environment. And if parents don't get what they want, they'll go to the next district, or they'll open enroll to an online district or a private school. So that's why that's That's why the districts are kind of saying to the state, help us out. Again, where I'm at, 471 districts, 2,200 individual school buildings. And one district is on an island that you can only get to with a ferry, and there's like 58 kids. I mean, these districts are like, help us out. Like, state throws a bone here on a statewide directive on like what's supposed to happen, or maybe there's at least a statewide distribution of mask. And, this sounds crazy, like that this would happen, but that's not the way it happened for school safety in my state 3-4 years ago. The state had a catalog that they gave out to all of the districts, and you could pick door locks for your schools, and the state picked up the cost, Department of Justice. So I saw the catalogs, I went to the schools, I saw the lot. So it's not crazy to do this, but let's get back to the chat. Bacon wrote, suspended for fighting back then. No wonder kids act the way they do. They can't take a punch anymore. So, whoa. And Safety Doc podcast. Okay, so Mictobus wrote, don't schools get paid by the head these days, though? They have every incentive to keep attendance up. Yes, that's exactly how it happens. So it is a head count. It's a rolling 3-year average. But the more kids you can get, and if a kid virtually enrolls to your district, so now if you've created this virtual school within your district, so we have a virtual 5th grade, and it has 100 kids in it or whatever, they get the money for that as if they were there. So yes, schools have a big incentive, and that's why I think as we read through, like, schools took their pandemic and they got things that are very visible, like, hey, we just got our artificial turf football field. There's more to that, right? Like, there's reasons to do that try to give you some of that appeal. So yeah, Mictobus wrote, that's the core of the problem, looking to the government to solve our problems. So I think some of that is happening. You're right. One of the things all the districts could do, and I brought this up, I said, there's nothing, right, that prohibited you from taking this money, this money, even without the money, saying, we're going to do this hand washing campaign, right? We're going to do that. We're going to increase the breaks during the day. We're going to redo the schedule a little bit, and we're going to increase hand washing. I mean, there's nothing that prohibited anybody from taking that local control. It was supposed to be, right, that the schools looked to the county, and the county was supposed to give guidance to schools and nursing homes and other places on gatherings and sporting events and stuff like that. And then the county's kind of like, so long on that. So yeah, schools are, and it is weird in a way too, that there hasn't been, it has been open. Like, schools would jump on if there was a Department of Ed standard that was out there, even if, there were certain masks that were endorsed or certain processes. And it's weird. Like, I don't see that stuff. Let's look right here. Also, why skipping school so frowned on. They were issuing escalating fines to the parents if students were absent. Yeah. And today, right now, their truancy is pretty much out the door, right? Schools aren't filing for truancy in the current settings. So that's, I mean, I've had administrators say, we've had kids who we haven't seen for a quarter, right? Like, and it just isn't a priority either in the courts or the school to pursue this stuff. So, like, what was a pretty, not a pretty cohesive, but a much more functional system before COVID is now really piecemeal. But again, it doesn't excuse anybody from trying or making steps, which we've talked about a lot of those, to get things back on track. I mean, whether you're working in healthcare or transportation or IT or, whatever it is. I mean, you have to just take where you're at, your baseline, and figure out how to move forward from that. So that's where, again, it's a struggle for me when schools don't have a baseline, or at least they could come on and say, like, hey, we're struggling to try to find environmental services to come in and to do these things. Well, at least then you can document that you've done that, but Again, not the dialogues I see. Once in a while, you'll see these things on TV where the news will come in and they'll be like, "Hey, this district, they have this new sanitizing thing. It's like the Ghostbusters backpack, and they're going around and spraying, up on the lights and all the stuff like that." I don't know, what the effectiveness of that is, right? Like, because you can see the stuff happening, but you don't know the pre and post, and how frequently that's being done. But at least it's something, right? Um, so a few things like. So let's see here from our friend Mictavus. Problem. And school boards have local control. So school boards can make these decisions, as I said, to provide certain masks, or to school board to say increase the amount of time between that people have access to restrooms for hand washing. We want all of our buildings to increase that by 10 minutes a day. So figure it out, building administrators, how you're going to do it. I mean, wow. Yeah, there are certain requirements of schools have to have so many minutes of instruction, but there are ways to get creative, and whether you count this as instruction. Those are all little things that you can tweak around. There's nothing that's kind of messed up with that, but so all right, yeah, this is good stuff. So a few things. Please come in and hit the like button and subscribe. Like, I'm up to 421, and my goal is that the show gets to 1,000 subscribers. That would be great. And if you are interested, that book, School of Errors, Rethinking School Safety in America, it's on Amazon. I got 43 5-star reviews. It's a good read about how schools handle safety, and you can easily pull out of that book of, here's probably what discussions are and are not happening right now in a virus environment. That was written before COVID came out. It came out in fall of 2019. So I had like a 4-month marketing window before everything just went kind of wonky, crazy, bad with that. So like when schools shut down and book companies and people, all of the industry kind of went and hibernated and came back. So but yeah, so everybody, again, mask guidance we talked about in schools. The litigation is starting to roll in schools. We have this thing called foreseeable tort with schools. Should they have anticipated? Boards of education should have anticipated that there would be kids getting sick because of exposure to other kids in close proximity, or kids or staff not wearing masks. Contact tracing in schools, it is crazy. It's nobody has this down. Again, I saw it on the news, one place, or some, here's a school in New York where they contact traced it between a teacher, reading a story and kids getting sick. I've never seen that anywhere, anyone talk about anything even remotely close to that. Environmental services. Yeah, big, we should be hearing about environmental services coming into schools and identifying on surfaces and in the air and how to mitigate that. It should be like a national campaign, right? To do that. It's not. We can learn a lot if we go back and you go on, some videos about Legionnaire's disease, of figuring out how that lived in HVAC systems and how they had to have strategies to mitigate that in HVAC and test for it and stuff like that. Seems like a lot of the common sense things we kind of knew, we've just gone by the wayside. Pandemic funds that came to schools, sadly, there's no oversight, and you can justify virtually any expenditure if you just sit down for 30 seconds and think, how could this purchase of a Jumbotron be linked to pandemic safety? Messaging, right? It's a large thing, and we can message to a lot of people, and we could also do a 30-second video on the importance of hand washing, and it could be replaying on the Jumbotron. Boom, got it justified. In the bag. And that might sound like hyperbole. I don't know anyone who's got Jumbotron. Someone's probably thinking, I just heard a safety doc. There's a good way we can get our Jumbotron. But you could, with everything else that's kind of been approved, you could go down that road. And just stay informed yourself. Attend board meetings if you have kids in school. Figure out what's going on. And the question to ask is how do you know what areas need to be cleaned? Like, have you studied that? Is there something in a board minute in a report from environmental services? And is it a board meeting like 3 months ago? Can I see? Okay, I'll go to that and I'll read the minutes. Or can I see the report from environmental services? And these are the questions people need to be asking. Or how do you? Uh, what are your considerations for inter-rater reliability between masks when kids walk in with all kinds of different masks, which are now fashion items, right? They're aesthetics. So, hey, I'm my Milwaukee Bucks championship mask, but um, so those types of questions, like if you just put those out there, they're non-threatening, right? And they're going to require the correct thinking to get to answers to that. Um, so that's where you can help your school board and people, is to propose questions like that, um, to get them down into the right direction. So, but yeah, and again, for me, it's been an interesting week because I know some of these administrators in the districts where the litigation is coming forward. So immediately, they're just like, what does this mean for me? Like, I've never been in a situation where I've been named in litigation before in the district. And how, so, so it's, again, just kind of stepping through. Well, I don't, your legal counsel is going to advise you. That's not me. But, there are things, right? Discovery. So if your board voted on something and you were supposed to have social distancing or hand washing or mitigation things, like, how did you do it? How did you document that you did it? How are you checking that kid? What happened if a kid didn't have a mask up? Like, what kind of response was there to that? Those are all big questions that come out in discovery, like all of those things. And any signage, right? Did you increase signage in your building? Did you take a picture of it? Remember that Solocator app? I mean, that's Joe Dolio type stuff. And really, thank you to Joe. Joe's his contributions, but so um, so let's see here. Pussy Toot or Toot, sorry. I would like to apply some of your safety technology in my everyday life, both at the workplace and at home. Thank you. Please subscribe to the channel. But yeah, thank you. I mean, so I haven't seen your name here before, but please, my website is safetyphd.com. PhD.com. My book, School of Errors, is on there, which is on Amazon, right? Went through a publisher. My new book will be out in February, The Velocity of Information. I don't know what the cover will look like, but about 255 pages. Human Thinking During Chaotic Times. There'll be a lot of really cool stuff in there too. And I interviewed 10 people, including Larry Lawton, America's biggest jewel thief. And I had a question for Larry. I said, Larry, how'd you find out about 9/11? Maximum security prison. Like, how'd you find out about it? And then how did you verify information? The whole federal prison system went on lockdown. Interviewed Alaskan crab boater Robert Travis and said, how'd you make how'd you process information fast to stay alive when you're on a crab boat? Most dangerous job per Bureau of Labor Statistics back when he was doing it 2003 and 2007. And he said, part of the story is like, all of my bosses died. Like, I had 4 bosses, they're all killed on the boat. Like, refrigerator sized chunk of ice comes, boom, they're gone. So all of these 10 interviews and my research and it really flows into a very intriguing kind of analysis of how people respond during chaos and how populations respond, how governments typically respond. And then, like, as the bottom line for you is, like, if you read the book, you'll understand what happens to people around you. You'll pick up on those signs, whether it just be a person or your neighborhood or a population. And you'll be like, you can get out in front of that, get out in front of the pack and get to a safer psychological place, or, survival, or even things to say to your kids and things to do with your own kids. I have a story in here where, my daughter, at the start of the COVID shutdown, their schools shut down and all that. She was in elementary school and she's like, hey, everybody is, they're tearing out the playground. So she's telling me this, they're ripping out the playgrounds. My friends are emailing me and I'm like, they're not ripping out playgrounds, but she's like, her friends are so, keyed up on this. And so I said, well, so at some point I just said, let's figure out what's going on. So grab your mask, right? And I had a tripod and a camera, and we recorded 13 videos over like a 4 to 5 month span. And they were maybe like 10 minutes long. None of them are public. Um, and we went to the playground, and it had the tape. And in my book, I took a picture of a lot of places we went. So it had the yellow police tape and, you can't be here and stuff, but the playground was still there. It wasn't ripped out. They had some sand next to it. They were going to add a volleyball court, and they had to idle that during the pandemic stuff. So that's where I think some of our friends thought they were digging it up. But we went to the armory in my community. We went to the Walmart. We went, outside the parking lot. And so we got to see people lining up as they went in and stuff. And so I said, well, what do you see that's different than the last time we were here? Well, now there's people have to line in. They only go in this entrance. Okay. We went to the hospital. We went to her school. Like, she took a picture of the door of her school where it said, school's closed because of COVID, whatever. But, so, and it became tangible, right? She could say, I observed, instead of they said. And so it's a really genuine story in the book of how, it wasn't. So the cool part about the book, right, is it's not something I've never lived through or something I'm looking back on and trying to research. Like, all of us, like, I was living this, and I recognized really early on when this was happening, I'm going to gather all this information for the book. So when you read the book, it's rich, because that night I was writing about that for the book. I mean, and so again, the way that you interact with people, and there's all these things that I'll kind of break down in the book into videos here. And as you have it, it's really just a great psychological tool. Nobody's done this, especially in contemporary times. Nobody has done this. So it is exciting for me. And again, it's been accepted for publication. It's going through the typesetting and all of that type of stuff right now. And marketing is preparing for their campaign and stuff like that. So it is called The Velocity of Information, and I'll let everybody know like when it's out. So, but yeah, so everybody, yeah, I want a Jumbotron now, says Bacon. Yeah. And it's kind of weird too, because like in my community, there are districts around here that have Jumbotrons. I mean, huge, massive Jumbotrons and artificial turf, even before this. But now, those things are just more prevalent. So I don't know if I'm just getting old and times are passing me by, or what's happening. I guess I have a different opinion of what it is to be a steward of the taxes that are paid in by myself and by those around me. But again, maybe I'm just too old school on that. So, hey, look at this. Yeah. So one thing I think is cool, right? You can buy my book, and if you donate it, you can get a tax deduction at your library. Some people have done that with School of Heirs, and so that's a cool. And the other thing is, go into your library. I mean, it's through a publisher, a scholarly publisher. The book School of Heirs is in hundreds of libraries across the world. And like Squamish, British Columbia has a copy of my book. Like, it's in a library in Nigeria. And go to your library and have the name of the book and the author, and say, I want this in our library. Like, I want you to order this book. And most times libraries will order that if you're in the community. And people have done that. They've come in. Parents have contacted me with School of Heirs and said, yeah, I went to my local library and said, I want this book. And libraries have budgets, like, and they got a lot of money out of this stimulus stuff too. And that's all it takes, is just here's the name and author, and they'll match it to an ISBN number. And it is marketed through the publisher, specifically also to libraries. So it's nothing they're going to look at and say, well, this isn't a library worthy book or anything like that. They will, they will, if you're making a recommendation, hey, like, they will certainly go for that. So, I mean, thanks for bringing that up. So yeah, or else just buy a whole bunch and then just like throw them out on the lawn at the libraries as you drive by, like you're just tossing them out. So, yeah, it is pretty cool. Like, I get notified periodically updates from my publisher of like new places the books are appearing, and it's cool. Or it's cool, like, if somebody contacts you and says, hey, like, I checked your book out of, it's in Dallas and in Denver, and I mean, big libraries, but it's kind of neat when someone has like a smaller library, or they are able to get it and say, hey, like, got your book, and I found your information, and wanted to thank you, for writing this, or have, something to share, like a question about or something like that. So it's been a cool thing. Like writing a book. I'll get into this sometime too, and I'm going to be on the show tomorrow on Masculine Geek and the author roundtable. But writing a nonfiction book and now writing a second nonfiction book. Um, First one was 1,000 hours of time. Second one was probably about 2,000 hours, and it's authentically 2,000 hours. I mean, doing the outlines, 471 endnotes and proofs, and 255 pages, and interviewing people and transcribing stuff. But it is this incredible process where you learn so much about yourself and about systems and people and the generosity of people. Um, and it's amazing creative process. And the only thing I can think is like, maybe like people who were, creative processes were really encouraged, centuries ago, right? To create things and now we've just, just people aren't as creative. They're not taking time to be creative, and taking big creative is like risky, right? Like, you can have cancel culture or, those type of things. So to be able to create something and to get feedback from people and to have it hit like a mainstream market is just really is really a cool thing. So, all right. So so Bacon says my local library doesn't let me in without a specific face covering. So maybe they have like a drive-through, right? Like, so you can get the books in and out, and or you could just put a sign like on as you're driving by, like, hey, like, get this. Or I bet if you contacted Inglewood, like they would be able to help you out. So yeah. So Sast wrote, the doc also interviewed Juan Brown for his book. Awesome. So Juan Brown, if you follow the Blanco Lirio channel, Juan, I interviewed Juan for his Oroville Dam coverage in 2017. The Oroville Dam Reservoir in Oroville, California, was the spillway failed. Like the concrete busted up on halfway down, and it started to erode back. So then they're like, "Oh God, like this is a big problem here." So if it would have eroded all the way back, like the dam would have failed, right? And it would have flooded all the way down to Sacramento. Some people say like Sacramento would have been under 5 feet of water. So this was kind of coming out in the news, and Juan gets up in his personal plane, 1946 personal aircraft, and he's flying around taking video of it, and he starts to learn like the water in, water out, and they posted online, the Department of Water in California, and he goes up there and he starts to interview like people surveying, the engineers surveying the scene, and as they're working on it, and he would go to meetings. And so Juan is interesting. Juan's a citizen journalist. Like he learned about this stuff. He didn't know anything about really dams and spillways and all of that. He would go to meetings in California where they would talk about, they'd have the engineers there to give updates on the Oroville Dam, and people in the audience be like, hey, like, thanks for the answer. Now I have a question for Juan. Like, Juan, you were up there and you saw this. Like, is this matching like what you're seeing? And because he had that much credibility. And I think that's the part of like, all of us could be citizen as journalists. We all have that capability. I mean, you don't necessarily need a plane to do that. You have to, ask the right questions, use your observations, learn a little bit about something. And, we outsource all of that to people that are not working in our best interest, to get information out fast, but not accurate. So Juan was an amazing and so generous with his time. And he proofed everything, when it was done, saying, hey, did I get this right? I recorded it. And I just have a massive amount of respect for everything that he's done on so many things that he's covered in the public interest. But yeah, Juan's a fun guy. That'll really pop to life reading that passage about Juan. And that's a cool thing about the book. Again, like these 10 personal interviews of people who I wrote about, who are kind of reclusive. Like they're intelligent, they're well known in their areas, but they're not people who are going to give out interviews. You got to build up trust. Like when I had Larry Lawton, America's Biggest Jewel Thief, Larry, I had to do a lot of legwork to build trust before I got an interview with Larry Lawton, who has 1.32 million YouTube followers, right? And so that's the thing is you're when you read this book, you're going to also understand the trust that people had in sharing these stories with me. And then the way I was able, hopefully, to take them and do justice and make them really alive and vibrant. And then as you'll go through this, I use bullet points for you, the reader, and then also for me to kind of make sure that everything I was doing was keeping in line, that this was very coherent. And I don't know, it was really cool. Like, I'm so excited to um, be able to offer this out to people, and it was really cool. Yeah. So Juan Blanco Lirio is the channel, and I don't know. I think one is, I don't know, like 250,000, 230,000. So Cameron wrote, "That's impressive. You're able to get Larry on. How'd you go about getting him on?" So, so Larry Lawton, um, I had been watching his stuff on YouTube, and so I was just like, "Oh my god, this is just fascinating stuff." Larry Lawton, America's Biggest Jewel Thief, and I found he has this reality check program, and I called. I was on vacation I was on vacation with my family, and I was able, they had their number there, and I called. I was out on a patio. So so Cameron, I'm on a patio, and there's my family's inside getting ready, and I'm like, I'm just gonna try, like, I'm just try, because you send this guy an email, he probably gets 30,000 emails a day. I mean, probably does. And so I call, and I'm like, okay, like, thanks for answering the phone. I've been on PBS, and I want to interview Larry for my book. It's a nonfiction book, and here's the question I want to ask. And I've been following his work, and his book Gangster Redemption. And please, like, just give me a chance. Like, here's my website if you want to quickly validate who I am. And it was really cool. Like, it was somebody who worked in his office, and they're like, okay, we'll look at this, and if we'll get back to you if Larry's interested. So I'm like, oh, okay, like, we'll see. I don't know, who's holding who's filtering the system here, because obviously, like, there's a ton of requests. And probably in a day, they got back to me and said, Larry's interested. And they gave me a time. Like, because I mean, the guy's always doing interviews, or he's booked out. He's doing all this stuff. I mean, he just completed, and he was on A&E for a special they did about him, and he had another one. He's a character in Grand Theft Auto, right? I mean, so, like, all this stuff Larry's got going on. Plus, he works with government agencies and insurance fraud agencies on, like, big heist and things like that, to try to help them look in areas that might solve it. But so anyway, Larry calls me at the certain time, and I'm like, okay, thank you so much. And I had to record it, and then we just had a great conversation. Like, he was interested in my work, and I think he understood that I had a high respect for what he was doing, and also this very specific knowledge that only he could give. Like, how'd you find out about 9/11 in a maximum security prison? What was that like? And then he actually agreed to come on my show. So I said, I do this podcast, and I don't have a huge audience. Like, you have 1.31 million followers on your podcast, but I'd love to have you on. And he agreed to that. So I did have him on, and yeah, so I took the podcast and then also interviews, the interview I had with him, and combined those into that chapter, which is absolutely outstanding. There's so much also that I learned from him that I didn't have room in the chapter, but it was absolutely awesome. And Larry, so when Larry was released from prison, I mean, he had no idea what the outside, well, he had some idea, but the outside world, they gave him $5 bills. Remember when the $5 bill had the president's face, which was, like, big? They, trying to anti-counterfeit, stuff like that. So when they gave him the $5 bills, he thought they were setting him up. So he's like, yeah, I didn't want to spend them, because I thought it was just a way to get me busted again. And he's telling all these things. I'm like, oh my God. But Larry is extremely genuine. He's giving. And one of the things is, everybody I interviewed, when because this book is, it's under a publisher, just like the last one. I'm writing it under a contract. You have to get permission from everybody that you interview. And then you have to transcribe all those interviews, have to be recorded. And then once I write everything up, it has to come back to people, and they have to sign a legal document saying that they have read their chapter, and they are not requesting any revision to it. Or if there is, like, a revision, then you make it, and then you get it back to them. Usually then it's just something, like, really minor. But because, like, if you write a chapter about somebody and the book gets published and it ends up hurting their career, this chapter, or personally somehow, like, they could argue and come back to you saying, hey, like, you wrote this, so the publisher is not going to touch that unless you have these releases. Well, anyway, the last round of releases, when everything was all done and accepted, and I gave everybody their parts, I sent, the entire book to everybody and would say like, hey, like, please read pages 41 through 45, and then your image on page 205, and sign off this document. Larry, in 10 minutes, got it back to me exactly like he needed to, like exactly. He was the only person to do that. Like everybody else, I had to remind, or no, you have to copy this over, or you have to permit, or, you just can't give like an email back saying, hey, it looks good. I mean, it has to be. And I'm like, so that's where I have to touch base with Larry and say, you were just Larry's mind. Like he's so precise, right? Like, so he took it exactly. And he was the first one to get everything back. And of course, like at the end, he's like, hey, good luck on the book. Can't wait to read it. I'm like, that's really awesome, man. I mean, there are so many things going on in your life, and you're filming, this thing with A&E and whatever. But the fact that, this email comes in and it's got my name on it, and you jump on that permission thing, like, it's just really cool. It's just really cool. It's a really cool thing. So yeah, anyway, just the Larry Lawton thing. And I want to go down and I want to meet Larry at some point. I don't know when I'm going to be down in that Florida area. So some of the people that I interviewed too, like I want to actually, meet with them. Some of these people are not that far away from me. One is in Chicago, but yeah. So it's a fascinating thing. At some point, I'll kind of talk. I'll do like a little bit of a series where I talk about like how I came up with ideas for the book, like how I figured out who I was going to interview, and how you contact these people. Right? It's kind of a crazy thing. You're contacting someone saying, "Here's who I am," and I've got a little bit of street credibility because I've been on PBS twice, and I've got to flex that muscle as much as I can to get people, because they are so in demand, or else like they've been out of the field for a while. They're an expert and they're kind of just like wanting to chill. And I'm like, would you please consider this? These are the questions I would ask. This is how your work would help what I'm doing. You'll be portrayed well. This is a professional work that's extremely thoroughly edited. It'll be in libraries. And yeah, just the people. I had nobody who turned any offer, anything away. And I had a picture. It's the Orville Dam, and there's a engineer, Irfan Alvi was the head engineer of the team analyzing the failure of the dam. So this is like, I don't know, 200-page report with all these graphics and images comes out afterwards of saying like, here's why the dam, or here's why the spillway failed and all this stuff. And anyway, he so I contact him, and there was an image of the dam site, including the spillway and the emergency spillway. So like it was weird because Juan couldn't get me a good photo, because like you can kind of imagine like everything he's doing is video. He's up in his plane doing video in these little narratives, but so it's obscured, and if you try to like just take snap screenshots, it just wasn't working out. So there's this perfect image of the dam, and it's all labeled with kind of the parts, where the spillway is. So and it's taken from a plane, obviously. So I contact this guy, and I'm like, I find his email address on the report. I'm like, I'm writing a book, and can I use this image? Because you've labeled it, and you've obtained this image, and you've labeled it. Can I use it in the book? It was like a Sunday. It was a Sunday. I was out walking, and so I emailed the guy, and like an hour later, I check my phone and there's a response. He's like, "Oh yeah, no problem. Like, you can use it." He's like, "By the way, like I got a higher resolution. Like, can you wait till Can you wait till tomorrow?" I'm like, my God, like, of course I can, And so right away the next day, he sends me like the higher resolution and a note of permission. I grant you permission. This first appeared, whatever, and then I just cite it out appropriately in an end note. But I'm like, that guy didn't have to do any of that. He could have just blown off that email, or he could be like, I've got other things to do. I don't have to do this. Or I don't have to find the high res photo for this guy. And so that's the thing, is like, there's a lot of really awesome people that you interact with. And I can get into, I mean, certainly people that help me with graphics and have just elevated the book to incredible levels. But yeah, that's a cool thing. When I was doing my dissertation for my PhD, I remember meeting with my advisor once, and so you're citing all of these people who seem like they're completely remote and on these ivory towers on these islands and experts and stuff like that. And my advisor said to me, he said, "Why don't you just call this guy? Like he's up at the University of Michigan or something like." Yeah, like you can find his contact information on the university website. Why don't you just call him and ask him what he meant by whatever distributed leadership or whatever the term was? I'm like, really? Like, and he's like, yeah, just call some of these people, see if they're around or they'll respond. And I did it, and a number of them I was able to get a hold of, and of course they were interested that I was interested in their work, and they helped me out. But I'm like, that was a good thing. And again, it goes into the book too of like, talk to the people, find your network, ask people who are authentically in situations what is happening, instead of having some middle person try to pull us together, or that you just have some cold document that's been put together and you're trying to pull information from it, without having much of a context. Try to find the people. So that was really cool. Question about, yeah, how do you do that? Um yeah, anyway, drones to film the damage and all the progress. Yeah, they use drones to film the damage and all the progress rebuilding the dam. Yeah, that was amazing. Yeah. In Department of Water in California was sharing that. And the thing right now, SAST on that is the Oroville Dam Reservoir is like at an all-time record low. So they're barely getting enough. I don't know if they're even operating the um, the turbines on the dam if they have any water coming in. Like, it is that low. So you went from 2017 overtopping to right now this record low, which is just crazy, right? Because this window. So I'm writing about this Oroville Dam incident, this dam overtopping. If you went there today, I mean, the water is like way super low. So yeah, Mictobus said, and you're right, 100%. People tend to be remarkably approachable if you try. Yeah, and it's so weird too that I didn't explicitly have anybody tell me that until, again, I was into my PhD program toward the end of my PhD program, and my advisor was like, just figure this out. And Danny Woodburn, Mickey Abbott on Seinfeld wrote the foreword for School of Airs, a brilliant foreword. And I met him at a conference, and just did a follow-up with him. And he said, were you I think I met you at a conference, like when I followed up with him, like, yes, you remember me and stuff like that. And then, I'm just like, I've admired your work in, disability rights and accessibility and design. And I'd love to have you consider the forward for the book. And he's like, yeah. So we talked, we had quite a few conversations. He put together his outstanding forward for School of Airs, and did some promo for the book. And I'm like, that's all because I went out and contacted, tried to contact him. And so it is just really, it's really cool. And it really goes into the theme of the velocity of information too, of getting out there and making those contacts, or building your member check network, right? And people in here know what that is, your group of people of what's happening authentically around you. And instead of outsourcing things or offloading things to the media, who are just going to try to send you, a push notification and try to get your advertising clicks and stuff like that. And plus, like, they don't know the stuff, right? I mean, like, Juan knows it because he goes up there every day and he's trying to learn about the stuff. I mean, while a reporter, takes a couple pictures and talks to one person and leaves, and it's 90 seconds on the news. So yeah, it is just, so Bacon says Shasta Lake's the lowest I've ever seen it. Yeah. It's even around here in Wisconsin, we are really low. The Wisconsin River goes through my town, and it is low. So you'll see a lot of sand out there. So, not drought conditions necessarily, but like, it's just really, really low. So holy smokes, Sastra wrote, Orville is about 200 feet below normal. Wow. And when we think about, again, like overtopping the emergency spillway in 2017, I mean, being obviously down more than 200 feet because you wouldn't have it right up to the spillway. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. So it's kind of scary. But so hey, everybody, what I will do is I am going to write this on the podcast or on my website, safetyphd.com. I will do a little entry of about 800 words of a narrative of this show, and then I will rip this down to audio and get this over on what is it, Podbean. I'm like, where am I at? Like, I haven't been so long since I published anything. I'm like, what in the world? Yeah, I'll get it over there, and then of course I gets it up on iTunes and stuff. But this is the episode, like if you're doing a long drive, yeah, like across country, and you want to listen to something, this will be good. This will be good for my friend Phil Henry over in Germany, because he tends to have like long projects he works on. So, Mictibus, thank you. Austin, see you streaming again. Yeah, I'm glad. I've been thinking like the last couple of weeks of wanting to begin streaming again. Part of not streaming, by the way, was with the book to you need to have a little bit of a low profile while your book is being developed and accepted for publication. So that contributed somewhat to kind of pulling, and just the sheer amount of time I needed to spend on the book and the timeline with it. I had a really aggressive timeline to get that book done and fully accepted by the publisher in September. School of Errors was about a 2 to 3 year project, and 204 pages. This is 255, and this was about 16 months start to finish. So really pedal to the metal. But yeah, I want to get back. Will you be having a live stream schedule, Cameron Sanchez? Good question. I'd like to, and I want to make sure it's obviously not Wednesdays, because that's Masculine Geek. Tuesdays probably wouldn't be happening. I guess I'd have to see where Nick, August, and Rob, and also I probably wouldn't go head to head with the Mallard podcast. So that might leave maybe like a Thursday, or I don't know. It'd probably be like a Tuesday or a Thursday, although there's really nothing prohibiting from a Monday. My schedule's pretty open. So I need to figure that. I need to figure that out, but I'd like to get back to a regular schedule. So and kind of theme things out a little more. I mean, eventually, if I could get up to like 1,000 subscribers, right? that was one thing, though. I will say that in the process of asking people to, like, if I was going to interview somebody, they started to ask, like, how big of a social media like profile do you have? Because I think some people weren't going to come on the show necessarily and do an interview unless they knew I had a certain threshold of subscribers. So that was out there, and I totally get it with people. Like, they have a lot of stuff going on, and if they have a big subscribership, they're only going to they have to make some decisions based on how they're going to be marketed, right? But those people also said, yeah, I'll do an interview, with you, like something, where you send me the questions and we just do it and record it, but to actually like come in and do a show and schedule that out. So yeah, if the show gets a little more prevalent, I don't know if there'll ever be Safety Doc merch. I don't know if that'll ever be happening, but yeah. So you are the host, Doc. You do, it works for you. Yeah. Well, and let me know down below in the comments. Like, again, please post in the comments, because it helps the algorithm, right? There's no one posting comments, but if you even say, like, here's some other shows on some other dates. So I know Wednesdays to stay away from, but Mondays might be kind of a good way to do like a Monday. I don't know what else all happens on a Thursday, but yeah, it's just really good. So, all right. So everybody, this is now 11 o'clock here in Wisconsin, and actually, my tomorrow's pretty wide open. I don't have a lot going on. I do have, I'll be on Masculine Geek podcast tomorrow night as part of the author roundtable. So I'll be talking, about the two books, but mostly about velocity of information. and starting to pump that a little bit. So I have the press release. Both we're doing 2 press releases, the publisher, so spaced 5 weeks apart, and then there'll be a third press release with the audio book, but the audio book is staggered. That comes out after print. So there'll be actually this a little bit of a different marketing approach, more aggressive marketing with this than School of Airs, and I'm starting to like book out onto shows and things like that for interviews around the time frame that the book will be released. So a lot of this stuff is really in the works, like when you work with a traditional publisher and author events and all of those things. I've been through that once before, so it's actually really exciting. I mean, I have a pen, a Mount Blanc pen, which I bought when Mondays are usually open alongside from Rich Cooper. So yeah. Okay. So this is my Mont Blanc. So this pen was very expensive. I bought this used. I have a friend who's a pen connoisseur, and I said, I want a really good pen, not a fountain pen, to sign my books, like so the ink will never fade and all of that. So I got this again. I bought this used off of like a pen market that he like looked at all of the specification. He's like, this is the pen like you need. And I went online to the Mont Blanc website and I matched up the numbers and stuff. And then I ordered ink, and like an ink refill's like 10 or 12 bucks just for like, the ink. And I don't use the pen a lot. I mean, it's just for signing the books and stuff, and then it's real formal, like they send you the package and it comes in the mail, and it's it's real ritzy. And so it's a big thing, like to use the pen to sign the book. So yeah, and that I always keep the pen with me. Like no one, if I go to a book signing and stuff, like you never get to hold the pen. You get to see the pen, but because I've never spent that much on a pen in my life, and but I always said if I publish a book, I am going to splurge on a pen. And unfortunately, like I said, I knew the person that knew everything about pens, and it didn't take him long to find this one. Again, I had no idea there's a pen market. Like I had to go to this website. He gave me like, this is the one right here, and this is what they're advertising it for, and you can get the inks readily available for it, and it's a beautiful pen. Like when I sign stuff with it, and those of you who've received stuff from me, it's all been signed in this pen. So if you have a copy that I've signed for you, that's a pen that's signed. It is it brings it to life. It's a bold. There's something about signing with a pen like that. It's just like when I teach at the university. I teach at a university, 130-year-old buildings. It's a private university. Buildings are meticulously kept up. So it's all this intricate wood in every classroom. And when you go through this, it's just unbelievable. So when you go in, there are slate chalkboards, and they have this very exclusive chalk. So you get allocated so much chalk per class. And, so this isn't, the chalk you're buying at Staples or anything. I mean, I don't know where this stuff comes from, but it is when you write with it, it's almost this buttery type of writing. And I just told, every time I teach, like I just tell my students, I'm like, you have no idea how awesome this experience of writing, doing this class and putting all the notes and doing everything up on a slate board, which is probably 120 years old and like in perfect condition, and that they professionally clean, right? and then having your chalk in an envelope ready for you when you arrive to class, and using this chalk. It is incredible experience. And something that would have been lost, like if you would just have a whiteboard in there, something it's so weird. And as I said, it's a happy feeling. There's to use this buttery, specially obtained chalk that I think is specific for those slates, because they do tell you don't bring anything else in, because it could mess with these or whatever. So just use like what we provide for you. So which is really cool. By the way, the university, had they redid the signage outside, and I only teach there in fall. Well, I teach there in spring too, but it's all online, so it's 90 miles away. And I went there and I got in, and I got out of the building and it was night because class all day, and then the other stuff. And I'm like, where in the world? They redid the sign, so like I was like, where am I? Like I went out a different door. It's not that big of a campus, but I'm like, it took me a while to kind of get my bearings and figure out where my vehicle was and stuff like that. I'm like, whoa, like it's really cool though. Where do I store the pen? Like right in my desk. So it is. I mean, it's nothing worth anybody breaking into my house to get. Because it's a budget luxury pen, but yeah. But it is. I'm afraid of losing it when I go out and I go to book signing things. I have a leather pad folio, which is a zipper leather pad folio. Inside there's a zipper area too, so like I put it inside of there, so there's redundancy. And I just absolutely never kind of set it down, or else I put it inside my sport coat. Like I latch it on the inside. Most of the book signing kind of happens here. Like people send me books or something like that. So it's just yeah. And I have the stamp too. Like some of you have the stamp for the safety doc stuff. That's really rare. So there's a professional stamp that I had made from the artist rendition of my logo, my safety doc logo. And that's an ink stamp. And again, some of you do have that in books that I've signed and sent to you. So like that's rare. Sometimes I'll bring that to book signings, and other times because it's almost too big. Like you got to like maneuver it just right on the book. And if you screw it up, then it's like, oh, I'm sorry. Like the book you just bought for $30 has like a big smear of what should be like a safety doc logo. Sorry about that. So like I really need a controlled environment to kind of measure that up and take my time. And there's a certain amount of force you have to put down and hold it for like maybe 4 or 5 seconds. And so I don't like to take that one on the road with me because, there's just too much that can go wrong, right? Especially after somebody buys a book and hands it to you. I'm like, oh God. So yeah, that is pretty crazy. So, all right. So if I ever get to the point of in publishing anything, of getting an embossing set, that makes sense. Like I should look at some type of emboss, like for the inside of the cover page, something that would be small, like that'd be portable that I could bring. I saw I went to, I've gone to author events, right? So I see other authors that have stuff like that. It's pretty cool. I had like some author that has he had like a candle, and then he had a candle wax that he would dip a thing in, and he would like dip it inside his book. I'm like, I don't know what the hell's going on there. Like that's kind of not for me, but I guess like your fans kind of like that. I actually did, when I did my first book signing, I didn't even have a stand for my book. So I was at Barnes and Noble, and I just had and they had copies of the book too. And I'm like, and so like they gave me a stand. They're like, here, you can keep this one. I should have like asked for more. Like I've got to order a set now because right out of the 2 books. But when you go places, I want to have a couple like that I can, if I lose them or something like that, if I leave them someplace, not a big deal. But I didn't even have a stand. When you're a new author, like you don't really know what to do, or like it's weird because I have the first version of School of Airs ever, like the very first book published. The publisher got to me, and I highlighted out what I read at book events and stuff like that. So it's like that is the one with my own personal handwritten notes in it. So at some point like that, we'll sell at auction for millions of dollars. But yeah, it's we'll see. So all right, everybody, thank you so much again. If you can hit that if you can get into social media and like share it and say, hey, like Doc came out of somewhere after 10 months. He appeared. He seemed pretty alert, pretty cohesive for the better part of 3 hours. And here's the show. Like you might want to go in and check it. Any comments below on when the show could go, or anything like you're thinking like from a school and this interface between school and pandemic? You're like, hey Doc, like you should watch for this stuff, or here's something I'm seeing in my area. Here's something the news is covering. Here's something that the school board is doing, or something like that. Like put it down below. Like I'd be fascinated to hear about that. Or even like there's anything kind of going on in that arena, you're like, hey, like this, it'd it'd be pretty interesting to do a show, like that. So I'm like, yeah. So today, I mean, I really thought there was value in doing a show of saying, how does this work? Like, why don't schools standardize this stuff? Was it an issue of money? Well, probably not. Was it an issue of access? No. How do board policies work, and how do boards function? What happens when you get sued? Like, if you're administrator, what are the next things that are happening, and how do we really know if this stuff is making a difference or not, or maybe we don't? And yeah, I think all that's pretty interesting stuff. So Cameron, thank you. Good show as always. I definitely appreciate it. Thank you for coming in. Bacon. Sometime I will be a guest on Bacon's show, live from the Inglewood. Mick DeBiss says, as always, thank you. And yeah, thanks for your robust support on social media. I very much appreciate that. SAS too many. So good stuff. Well, everybody, I am going to hit the hay, and if you follow too in my video archives, you can find the interview I did with Larry Lawton, which is pretty cool. Like, I download all of these and then I listen to them. Usually when I'm biking, I listen to my former podcast, and yeah, it's cool stuff. Like, I think one of the first people I interviewed, like podcast 3, I interviewed a lady who had a search and rescue dog, Sierra. And she was talking about that process of how, like, you get the call, and I'm kind of like, I wonder how that stuff even works today with drones. Like, is most of that stuff kind of changed? I mean, that was like 4 or 5 years ago. So, all right. Is Joe Dolio saying, great show, Doc? Thank you, Joe. Shout out to the state of Michigan. And Joe, I think we're sending some rainy, cold weather over your way, because that's what we had here. So, all right, everybody, take care. And I will try to get some schedule up, and I've got a couple outlines for some future shows here. So comment, share, subscribe, and I appreciate it. Out, everybody.